Hey guys, Nemo here again. Just want to say, it's been a while. Thanks for tuning in as always. And if you enjoy these stories, guys, please let me know in the comments what you think. And if you have any other great ideas, let us know. We'd love to hear your feedback. And now, as always, please enjoy the stories.
I almost didn't go. The plan felt kind of dumb the whole day. I had downloaded Hinge a week earlier after one of my friends kept saying everyone decent was on there now and it wasn't like the weird dating apps from years ago. Apparently people actually met normal people there. That was the pitch anyway. By Friday afternoon, I was still staring at the chat thinking about canceling. The guy seemed normal enough. His profile said his name was Matt, he was 27, worked in marketing somewhere in Brighton, liked running, liked old movies, the usual stuff. Nothing creepy. Nothing amazing either. Just a guy. But I had already said yes to drinks, and he had picked a place near the marina that I'd never been to before. It looked kind of cool online. Low lighting, exposed brick, random plants hanging from the ceiling like someone tried to turn a warehouse into a lounge. So I told myself to stop overthinking it and just go. I got there around 7:10, and the place was already busy in that early evening way where every table has someone, but it isn't loud yet. The windows were huge and looked out toward the water. Boats were just sitting there in the dark, and the reflections from the bar lights made the glass look like a mirror. Matt was already there. He stood up when I walked over, and I remember thinking he looked slightly different from his pictures, but not in a bad way. Just more tired, maybe. His hair was shorter. His jacket looked expensive in a way that made me wonder if he was one of those people who cared way more about clothes than I did. Still, first impression was fine. Friendly enough. We ordered drinks and sat at this little round table near the middle of the room. At first, the date felt normal. The typical Hinge stuff. Where are you from? What do you do? How long have you been using the app? All that. I remember noticing little things, though. Not red flags exactly. Just odd details that didn't add up. For example, he kept glancing around the room. Not in a nervous way like someone looking for an exit. It was more like he was checking tables. His eyes would move across the bar, stop somewhere for a second, then come back to me. At one point, he even leaned slightly sideways like he was trying to see past a pillar near the back. I figured maybe he knew someone there. Another thing was his phone. He kept flipping it over every time it buzzed, not even checking it properly, just turning it face down fast like he didn't want the screen visible. It happened a lot for a Friday night where we had only been sitting there like 20 minutes. But again, nothing major. People get messages. We ordered a second round and started talking about music and travel and random stuff. He seemed relaxed. Actually, a bit too relaxed. Like he had done this exact same conversation many times before. Halfway through the second drink, the bartender came over with another beer. He placed it down and casually said a name that was definitely not Matt. It was something like Daniel or David. I can't remember exactly, but it was completely different. The bartender said it in that normal tone people use when they know someone already, like he had served him before. Not a question, just greeting him by that name while dropping the drink. For a second, I thought maybe the bartender was talking to someone behind us, but Matt immediately reacted. Not dramatically, just this tiny pause where his hand stopped halfway to the glass. Then he kind of laughed and corrected it quickly, saying his name again. The bartender looked confused for a second, apologized, and walked away. The moment lasted maybe 5 seconds. But something about it sat weird in my head. Matt brushed it off fast. He joked that people mix his name up all the time. Said his brother had the other name and sometimes bars got it wrong when they used the same card. I nodded and moved on. But once it happens, you start noticing things. About 10 minutes later, he checked his phone again. This time I saw part of the screen before he flipped it. It was Hinge. The orange icon was right there. That alone didn't mean anything. Plenty of people still have the app while dating. But the weird part was the message preview. It had a girl's name that definitely wasn't mine. And the preview said something about being near the bar already. He locked the screen so fast, I almost thought I imagined it. Around that time, I noticed something else. 2 tables away from us, near the wall with the plants, there was another girl sitting alone. She had a drink and kept checking her phone. Every once in a while, she looked around the room like she was waiting for someone. At first, I didn't connect it. Then Matt did that sideways glance again. This time it lined up exactly with where she was sitting. He looked at her for maybe a second too long before turning back to me and asking something about my job. That was when the feelings started building in my stomach. Not panic, just confusion. About 15 minutes later, he suddenly said he needed to use the bathroom. He stood up quickly, grabbed his phone, and walked toward the back hallway. Instead of heading straight there, he slowed down near the table with the girl. He didn't stop completely, but he definitely hesitated, like he was checking something. Then he kept walking. The girl watched him pass. Her face changed in this really small way, like the moment when someone recognizes a person they've only seen in photos. He disappeared down the hallway. I sat there trying to tell myself I was making connections that didn't exist. But the longer he stayed gone, the more the whole thing felt wrong. While he was gone, the bartender walked past again. I casually asked if the place was always this busy on Fridays. He said yeah and mentioned something about regulars coming through in waves. Then he glanced toward the hallway Matt had gone down and casually used that same wrong name again while talking about him. That was when the puzzle pieces finally snapped together. The bartender clearly knew him as that other name, and he said it like someone who had seen him multiple times before. A minute later, Matt came back and sat down. He seemed slightly distracted now, checking his phone again, looking around the room again. Then he suddenly suggested we might move tables because it was getting noisy. The bar wasn't noisy at all, but the table he pointed to was closer to the entrance and farther away from the girl near the wall. While we were getting up, I glanced over at her again. She was staring directly at him. Not in a random way, in a very focused way. Then I saw her phone screen light up. The Hinge chat was open, and the profile picture at the top of the chat was him. Same photo from his profile, the one where he's leaning against a railing with the ocean behind him. Except the name on her screen wasn't Matt. It was the same name the bartender had said earlier. That's when I understood what was happening. I sat back down instead of moving tables. Matt noticed immediately and asked what was wrong. I didn't say anything. I just turned slightly and looked at the girl again. She was already standing up. And I noticed something even worse. Near the front window, maybe 3 tables away from the door, there was another girl sitting alone with a drink and her phone open. And the guy in the photo on her screen looked very familiar. It was him again. Same Hinge profile picture. Same smile. But when she scrolled up, I saw a different name. 3 different names. Same guy. Same bar. Same night. 3 separate Hinge dates happening at once. The worst part wasn't even the lying. It was how organized it clearly was. He had picked one bar. Scheduled 3 girls. Probably spaced the times out slightly. And just planned to rotate between us. The bartender calling him the wrong name was probably the first crack in the whole setup. Matt followed my eyes toward the girl near the wall. Then toward the other one near the window. For the first time all night, his face looked actually worried. Like the math in his head stopped working. I grabbed my bag and stood up. As I walked toward the door, the girl near the plants also started moving. The one by the window noticed both of us standing and looked confused. Matt stayed frozen at the table. I didn't even look back when I left. But when I reached the street outside, I saw the girl from the wall come out a few seconds later. She looked just as confused as I felt. Neither of us said anything. We just stood there for a second under the yellow street lights while people inside kept drinking like nothing weird had happened. Then the third girl came out too. She was holding her phone with his Hinge profile still open. All 3 of us looked at each other and silently realized we had been sitting inside the same bar on 3 different dates with the exact same guy. And the only reason we found out was because a bartender used the wrong name. The weirdest date I've ever been on started with a message that should have made me cancel right away. Not a red flag exactly, just one of those things where you pause for a second and think about whether your night is about to become complicated for no reason. Her name was Lily on Hinge. Her profile looked normal enough. She had pictures hiking somewhere with mountains in the background, one photo holding a coffee that looked like it took 10 minutes to make, and one picture with some small animal wrapped in a blanket. At the time, I didn't even look closely at the animal. We talked for a few days and it was easy. Nothing intense, just dumb jokes and random stuff about work. She said she worked part-time at some vintage clothing shop and liked trying new restaurants. I had just moved to the area a few months earlier, so I said I was still figuring out where to eat. She suggested this small ramen place downtown that I had passed a bunch of times, but never actually gone inside. Everything felt normal right up until the afternoon of the date. Around 3 that day, she sent a message asking if it was okay if she brought her emotional support ferret. I thought she was joking at first. I actually stared at my phone for like 20 seconds trying to figure out if it was sarcasm. But the next message had a picture attached. It was the animal from her profile picture. Long, skinny body, brown fur, little pointed face. It was wrapped in some tiny striped blanket like a burrito. The caption under the photo said his name was Noodle. I had never met anyone with a ferret before. I had barely even seen one outside of random videos online. But I didn't want to seem like the guy who refuses someone's support animal 5 hours before dinner. So I said it was fine. That was mistake number 1. The restaurant was smaller than I expected when I got there. Maybe 10 tables total. Dim lighting. Wooden walls that looked like they used to be part of some old shop before it got turned into a restaurant. The place smelled amazing though. Broth and garlic and fried stuff all mixed together. Lily was already sitting at a corner table when I walked in. And sitting on the table next to her drink was a small soft carrier. The zipper was slightly open. Inside I could see fur moving. She seemed nice right away, friendly. Kind of chaotic energy though, like someone who had 5 thoughts happening at once. The first few minutes were normal. We ordered food, talked about work, talked about the area. Then the carrier moved. A small head poked out through the zipper. That was my first time actually seeing the ferret in person. It looked exactly like the picture, but somehow more intense. Its eyes were locked on the table like it was scanning for something. Lily casually unzipped the bag the rest of the way and lifted him out. He was longer than I expected. Like a living robe with legs. She set him down on the table for a second before quickly moving him to her lap. Apparently he liked to explore. At first it was almost funny. He kept popping his head up over the edge of the table like a submarine coming up for air, just staring at everything. Plates, glasses, chopsticks. Then the food arrived. The second the bowl hit the table, the ferret went into full mission mode. His head shot up, and he started climbing. Not slowly either. 1 second he was on her lap, and the next second he was halfway up the table leg, like he had done it 1,000 times before. Lily grabbed him quickly and laughed like this was totally normal. She explained that he loved noodles, which felt like an important detail that maybe should have come up earlier. For the next 10 minutes, dinner became this weird balancing act where she was trying to hold the ferret with one arm while eating with the other. It didn't work. He kept lunging toward the table every few seconds. At one point, he actually managed to get his front paws onto my plate and grabbed a noodle before she pulled him back. I just kind of sat there pretending this was a regular first date. Other people in the restaurant had definitely noticed by then. One couple across the room was watching the whole thing like it was a live show. Eventually, Lily put the ferret back into the carrier for a minute so we could actually eat. That lasted maybe 3 minutes. Then the carrier started moving. Not just little movements either. The entire bag was shaking like something inside was trying to escape. Before either of us reacted, the zipper slowly pushed open from the inside. The ferret squeezed out like some kind of furry snake. And this time he didn't go for the table. He went straight for the floor. The speed was insane. 1 second he was on the chair, and the next he was under the next table. Lily jumped up immediately and started trying to catch him. Now there was a ferret running loose in a ramen restaurant. The staff noticed pretty quickly. One server came over looking extremely confused while Lily crouched under tables trying to grab him. The ferret seemed to think the entire restaurant was a playground. He darted between chairs, disappeared under a bench, reappeared near the kitchen door, then ran back toward our table. Every time Lily got close, he slipped away again. Eventually, he ran toward the wall near the back of the restaurant. And that's where things got worse. There was this narrow gap where the wall met the ceiling beams. Old buildings have weird spaces like that. Before anyone realized what he was doing, the ferret jumped onto a small decorative shelf on the wall. From the shelf, he climbed onto a beam. And then he vanished into the ceiling. Just gone. Lily froze. The entire restaurant went silent. Everyone was staring up at the ceiling like something out of a horror movie. At first, nothing happened. Then we heard movement above us. Tiny, fast footsteps running through the ceiling space. Back and forth. Scratching sounds. Then something shifted above the lights. One of the ceiling tiles moved slightly. Not enough to fall, just enough to show something was running over it. The staff looked completely lost. One of them grabbed a ladder from the back, but no one seemed excited about climbing up into the ceiling of a Raymond place to chase a ferret. Meanwhile, the noise above us kept moving around the room. It sounded like Noodle was exploring every inch of the building. At one point, something above the kitchen clanged loudly like he knocked over metal. A few minutes later, a small piece of dust fell down onto one of the empty tables. Lily kept apologizing to the staff and saying he would come back down eventually. Apparently, ferrets like tight spaces, which made the ceiling basically a dream house for him. For the next 20 minutes, the entire restaurant just sat there listening to this animal sprint through the ceiling. Every few minutes, a tile would shift slightly. Once we heard scratching directly above our table. Another time, the noise moved near the entrance. Customers started leaving. The staff tried tapping on the ceiling with a broom handle to guide him toward the opening near the back. That didn't work. He just ran somewhere else. Finally, one of the ceiling tiles near the far corner suddenly dropped down slightly. A small brown head poked out. The ferret looked down at the room like he was checking if the coast was clear. Then he dropped straight onto an empty table. Bowls rattled. Someone yelled. And the ferret immediately sprinted across the room again. Lily managed to grab him near the door before he escaped outside. She held him like a slippery noodle while the staff looked exhausted. By that point, our food was cold and half the restaurant had cleared out. She put him back in the carrier and zipped it completely shut this time. I paid the bill, which was around $38 total, and we walked outside. The carrier moved the entire way down the street. Noodle was still trying to get out. I never went back to that ramen place again. Sometimes when I walk past it, I still look up at the ceiling inside through the window and think about that ferret running through the beams above everyone's dinner. I knew the date was going to be weird about 30 seconds after I arrived, but by then it was already too late to back out without looking like a complete jerk. The original plan sounded normal when we set it up on Hinge. His name was Tyler, 26, lived nearby. His profile was mostly gym photos and one picture of him holding a smoothie that looked radioactive green. His bio said he was really into fitness and discipline and liked people who were motivated. That part didn't seem strange. Half the guys on Hinge say something about the gym. We talked for a few days. Mostly normal messages. Nothing creepy. Just basic stuff like work, hobbies, food. The usual things people say before deciding whether they want to sit across from each other in public for an hour. One thing he mentioned a lot was training. He talked about workouts the way some people talk about movies or sports. Long explanations about routines and timing and how structure makes everything better. I didn't really know much about gym stuff, so I mostly just nodded along in messages. Then he suggested meeting at a park. He said there was a big outdoor fitness area there, and it would be a chill place to talk and walk around. That still sounded normal enough. A lot of people do park dates. Coffee, walking, that kind of thing. So on Saturday afternoon, I drove over there. The park was bigger than I expected. Lots of paths, trees everywhere, and a section near the middle that had this outdoor gym setup. Pull-up bars, benches, metal frames for exercises, and rubber flooring under everything. When I pulled into the parking lot, I saw him almost immediately. He was already there standing next to the workout area wearing a sleeveless shirt and shorts like he had just stepped out of a fitness commercial. He waved when he saw me walking over. First impression was that he looked exactly like his photos. Super muscular, like extremely in shape. Not just casual gym guy shape. More like someone who planned his entire life around workouts. I figured maybe he had just finished exercising before I arrived. That assumption lasted about 10 seconds. The second I got close enough to say hi, he reached into a gym bag and handed me two things. A small stopwatch. And a whistle. For a moment I thought he was joking. But he looked completely serious. He pointed toward the workout area and explained that he had a time circuit he needed to finish today, and it would only take about 40 minutes. He said since I was there already, I could help by timing each set while we talked. It was so unexpected that my brain kind of stalled. I was standing in the middle of a park holding a whistle like a referee. People were driving past us on the path. And this guy I had just met 5 seconds ago was stretching his arms like we were about to start a training session. Before I even figured out what to say, he was already explaining the routine. 30 seconds work. 30 seconds rest. Different stations around the outdoor gym. He showed me how to use the stopwatch and told me when to blow the whistle. I wish I was kidding. At that point, I felt too awkward to just walk away immediately, so I figured I would humor him for a few minutes and then find an excuse to leave. That was mistake number one. The workout started immediately. He ran to the first station, which was a pull-up bar, and started doing reps like his life depended on it. Meanwhile, I stood there holding the stopwatch, trying to figure out how my Saturday afternoon turned into supervising a stranger's workout. Every 30 seconds, I had to blow the whistle. The sound echoed across the park. People walking their dogs started glancing over. A kid on a scooter actually stopped to watch. Tyler didn't seem to notice any of it. He was completely focused on the circuit. Push-ups. Jump squats. Pull-ups again. Some kind of weird plank position on a bench. Between sets, he would jog back toward me and quickly talk about random things like where I grew up or what shows I watch. But the conversations were broken up every half minute by the whistle. Imagine trying to have a normal first date conversation while someone is gasping for air and doing burpees. It felt less like a date and more like I accidentally signed up to be someone's assistant. After about 15 minutes, he started getting more intense. Sweat everywhere, breathing louder, moving faster between stations. He also kept asking me how accurate the timing was. Like really specific questions about whether the whistle was exactly at 30 seconds or slightly off. I checked the stopwatch constantly because I didn't want to mess it up. Meanwhile, the people in the park were definitely watching now. There was a group of teenagers sitting on a bench nearby recording parts of the workout on their phones. One older guy walking his dog gave me a thumbs up like I was his trainer. At some point, Tyler decided the rest periods were too long, so he changed the timing. Now it was 40 seconds work and 20 seconds rest, which meant I had to be even more focused on the stopwatch. Every time the whistle blew, he sprinted to the next station like someone chasing a bus. Halfway through the routine, he started explaining his fitness philosophy while doing lunges across the rubber floor. Long speeches about discipline and pushing limits and how most people don't take health seriously enough. The weird part was how he kept including me in the plan. Like this date was secretly an audition for a workout partner. He talked about morning routines and meal schedules and weekly training charts like we had already known each other for months. Meanwhile, I was still holding the whistle. Around the 30-minute mark, things got even stranger. He added new exercises that weren't part of the original circuit. Sprints across the grass, jumping onto a bench repeatedly, carrying a heavy kettlebell from one end of the workout area to the other. Every time he finished a station, he looked at me like he was waiting for approval, like I was judging the performance. My arm actually started getting tired from holding the stopwatch in the air. At one point, I missed the exact second by maybe 2 or 3 seconds because a dog ran between us and distracted me. Tyler immediately noticed. He stopped mid-exercise and asked what happened with the timing. Not angry exactly, just extremely serious about it. I reset the stopwatch, and we kept going. By now, almost everyone in that part of the park had noticed what was happening. A couple sitting on the grass nearby whispered to each other while watching the routine. A guy jogging past actually clapped after one of the sprint sets. The whole thing felt surreal, like I had accidentally become part of some public performance. Finally, the last station arrived. Tyler finished with a set of push-ups that lasted way longer than the timer. When he finally stood up, he looked completely exhausted, but also really proud. He grabbed a water bottle from his bag and sat down on a bench. For the first time since I arrived, the stopwatch wasn't running. He started talking normally again, like the last 40 minutes were a totally standard first date activity. Meanwhile, I was still holding the whistle. My hands smelled like metal from the stopwatch. He said the workout went great and asked if I wanted to come back next week to help with a longer circuit he was planning. Apparently, it would take about 90 minutes. That was the moment I finally realized he thought this whole thing was a successful date. Not awkward. Not strange. Just efficient. I handed the whistle and stopwatch back to him, so I had to head out soon and walked back toward the parking lot. As I left, I heard him starting another set of exercises behind me. The whistle blew again somewhere in the park. I never went back there on weekends after that.
Hey guys, really sorry to disturb you, but if you're enjoying the stories up until this point, please smash that like button. That's all I'm asking for you guys. Let's break some records this year. Now, back to the stories.
I knew the date was going wrong before the drinks even arrived, but the part that made it truly weird didn't start until she took the first sip. Looking back, the warning signs were there earlier in the day. Not huge ones. Just little things that felt off in a way I couldn't explain at the time. Her name was Chloe on Hinge. Her profile looked pretty normal. A few photos with friends, one picture in front of some beach cliffs, another holding a giant iced coffee like it weighed 5 pounds. Her bio said she liked people watching and late night food. People watching sounded harmless. Turns out I misunderstood what she meant by that. We matched on a Tuesday and set up drinks for Friday night. She picked the bar. Said it had a good crowd and good lighting, which was apparently important. I didn't think much about the lighting part. I assumed she just meant the place had a nice vibe. The bar was downtown in this older building that looked like it used to be a small theater. Inside it had high ceilings and long hanging lights that made everything look kind of warm and dim at the same time. Not dark enough to hide faces, but not bright enough to feel like a cafeteria. When I walked in, the place was already packed. People everywhere. Groups standing near the bar, couples at small tables, a few people alone scrolling on their phones. Chloe was sitting at a tall table near the middle of the room when I spotted her. She waved me over immediately. First impression was that she looked pretty much exactly like her photos. Maybe a little more intense in person, though. Her eyes moved around the room constantly, even while she was smiling. Like she was scanning everything. We ordered drinks at the bar. I got a normal beer, and she ordered something bright red in a tall glass with a slice of orange on the rim. Then we went back to the table. The conversation started normal enough. Work, where we grew up. The usual stuff people ask on first dates when both people are still trying to decide if the other person is weird. She seemed friendly, talkative, maybe a little blunt, but not in a rude way. Then the drinks arrived. She took one sip from the red drink. Just one. After that, she didn't touch it again for almost the entire night. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and looked around the room slowly like someone judging an art gallery. At first, I thought she was just distracted by the crowd. Then she pointed slightly with her eyes toward a guy standing near the bar, and she started rating him. Not in a quiet, joking way either. She actually leaned forward and analyzed the guy like she was on a competition show. Hair, posture, clothes, everything. At the end, she gave him a number out of 10. Then she looked at me like she expected my score too. I laughed at first because I thought it was a random joke. But she immediately turned toward another guy walking past our table and started doing the exact same thing again. This time she noticed the shoes first, then the way he walked, then his shoulders. Another number out of 10. Within 5 minutes, it became clear this wasn't a one-time joke. This was the activity for the entire date. Every man who entered the room got rated. Every guy who walked past the table got rated. Every bartender, every guy waiting for drinks, every random person crossing the room toward the bathroom. She studied them like a judge. Sometimes she gave detailed breakdowns about why someone lost points. Other times she just glanced for 2 seconds and gave a number immediately. What made it even stranger was how serious she was about the scoring. She kept track of everything in the notes app on her phone. Actual numbers. At one point, she even scrolled back through the list to compare scores from earlier in the night. Meanwhile, I was sitting directly across from her, wondering if I was also on the list somewhere. Eventually, I realized I definitely was. About 20 minutes into the date, she casually mentioned my score while looking around the room. She said it like she was announcing a contestant placement. Not mean exactly, just very casual. Like this was a totally normal way to interact with someone you just met. The more time passed, the more intense the rating system became. She started adding categories. Hair, clothing, confidence, height guesses, voice guesses if they spoke near our table. She even adjusted scores if someone did something she didn't like. One guy near the bar dropped his phone and she immediately lowered his number by 2 points. Another guy walked in wearing a jacket she liked, and she increased his score halfway through her analysis. People definitely started noticing. At one point, a group of 3 guys at a nearby table caught her staring and whispering while pointing slightly in their direction. They looked confused for a second. Then one of them waved at us like he thought we recognized him. She immediately rated all 3 of them, individually, then ranked them against each other. Meanwhile, her drink still sat there almost untouched, except for that first sip. Halfway through the night, she started creating what she called the leaderboard. Top 5 men currently in the room. She actually stood slightly in her chair to get a better view of the bar area while updating the list. The bartender walked past our table again, and she rated him for the second time. Apparently his score improved because he rolled up his sleeves since the last time she checked. I tried changing the conversation a few times, talking about movies, travel, anything normal. But every topic eventually circled back to whoever happened to be walking through the bar at that moment. The worst part happened about an hour into the date. A guy walked in wearing a jacket that looked kind of similar to mine. She immediately compared him to me. Not quietly, either. She opened her phone and actually adjusted both of our scores side by side, like we were contestants competing in the same category. I remember looking around the room and realizing something strange. For the entire night, she had barely asked me anything about my life. Almost all her attention was on the other men in the room, studying them, ranking them, updating the list. The bar kept getting louder as the night went on, but our table felt weirdly separate from everything, like we were running some strange judging panel that no one else signed up for. Around the 90-minute mark, she finally took another tiny sip of her drink, then immediately started rating a guy who walked in with 2 friends near the entrance. She watched them walk across the entire room, analyzed their posture, their hair, the way they laughed. 3 more numbers added to the list. By the time I checked the clock, she had rated over 40 different men, all written down, all ranked. I finished my drink and said I needed to head out soon. She nodded, but barely looked up from her phone while adjusting the leaderboard again. As I stood up to leave, she glanced around the bar one more time. Then she actually updated the list again. My score changed. Apparently, someone near the entrance had just beaten it. I walked out of the bar feeling like I had just spent 2 hours inside some strange competition I didn't even know I entered. Through the window, I could still see her sitting at the table scanning the room for the next person to rate. Her drink was still almost full. The first 10 minutes of the date were so normal that it almost made the rest of it worse. Nothing felt strange when I walked into the cafe. Nothing felt like a warning sign. It was one of those places that looks exactly like every other coffee spot people meet at for first dates. Brick walls, soft music, long wooden tables, people typing on laptops like they had been sitting there since morning. I even remember thinking it was probably going to be one of those dates that's slightly awkward but fine. His name was Ethan on Hinge, 25, working it somewhere nearby. His profile looked very average. A few smiling pictures, one photo hiking, another standing next to a dog that probably wasn't his. His bio said he liked movies and late-night food runs. We talked for about a week before deciding to meet. Nothing intense. Just random messages after work. The kind where both people are still feeling out whether the other person is normal. He seemed polite. Maybe a little quiet in the messages, but not in a strange way. So we kicked a small cab downtown and agreed to meet around 6. When I walked in, he was already sitting at a corner table near the window with 2 drinks on the table. He stood up when I got there and waved. First impression was that he looked exactly like his pictures. Maybe a little nervous, but most people are on first dates. We sat down and started talking. The first 10 minutes were the most standard conversation you could imagine. Work, how long we've been using Hinge, where we grew up, the usual things people ask when they're still figuring out the vibe. Nothing felt wrong. Then he casually mentioned something that completely changed the entire night. He said it in the most relaxed way possible, like he was talking about the weather. He told me that his mom tracks his location on his phone and sometimes checks in on his dates. At first, I thought he meant she texts him, which would still be weird but not insane. But then he explained it more. Apparently, she had full access to his phone location all the time, not just checking occasionally either, actively watching where he goes. He said sometimes if he's meeting someone new, she likes to drive past the place just to make sure everything looks normal. The way he said it was what made it truly strange. There was no embarrassment, no awkward laugh, just complete acceptance. Like this was a totally regular part of his life. I remember sitting there trying to figure out if he was joking, but his face stayed completely serious. He explained that she worries about him meeting strangers from the internet, which I guess is technically fair. But then he added another detail that made my brain freeze for a second. He said there was a chance she might stop by the cafe tonight just to check that I seemed nice. Not meet me exactly. Just observe for a minute. Then probably leave. I stared at him for a second trying to process that sentence. Somewhere outside this cafe was possibly a woman tracking her adult son's phone waiting to judge his date. He kept talking about it like it was nothing. Apparently she had done this before. A few drive-by checks. One time she even walked into a restaurant and sat at another table for 10 minutes just to see if the girl he was with seemed polite. He told the story like it was funny. Meanwhile, I kept glancing toward the windows of the cafe. The place had huge glass panels facing the street. Anyone outside could easily see inside, which suddenly made the whole situation feel weirdly exposed. For the next few minutes, I kept expecting him to laugh and say he was joking, but he never did. Instead, he casually checked his phone and mentioned that his mom had already texted him asking how the date was going. That meant she already knew he was here, probably watching the location dot on a map. The conversation after that felt strange. Not bad exactly. Just constantly interrupted by the thought that someone outside might be observing us. Every time a car slowed down on the street, I looked toward the window. Every time someone walked past a cafe, I wondered if that was her. Ethan didn't seem bothered at all. He just kept talking about work and movies like nothing unusual was happening. About 20 minutes into the date, a small silver car drove slowly past the cafe windows. It didn't stop, but it slowed down enough for the driver to look inside. I noticed it immediately. So did Ethan. He glanced out the window and then checked his phone. Then he smiled slightly. That was the moment my brain started connecting things. He said his mom sometimes likes to see the place first before deciding whether to come in, which meant that car might have been her. The cafe suddenly felt very small. People around us were just drinking coffee and talking like any normal evening. Meanwhile, I was sitting there wondering if I was being silently evaluated by someone in a parked car. 10 minutes later, another car pulled into the parking space directly outside the window. This one stayed there. I tried not to stare, but it was impossible to ignore. Inside the car was an older woman looking down at a phone, then looking up toward the cafe, then back at the phone. Ethan noticed my attention shift. He turned slightly to glance outside. Then he checked his messages again. His reaction told me everything. That was definitely her. He didn't wave. He didn't look surprised. He just nodded slightly like this was a routine check. The woman in the car stayed there for almost 5 minutes, just sitting, occasionally glancing toward the window, occasionally typing on her phone. At one point, Ethan's phone buzzed again and he looked down at the message. He said she was asking if I seemed friendly. I didn't even know how to react to that. After a few more minutes, the woman got out of the car. My heart dropped a little when I saw the door open. She walked slowly toward the cafe entrance, not rushing, just calmly approaching like someone about to pick up a coffee order. Ethan watched her through the glass like this was a totally normal event. The door opened. The bell above it made that little ringing sound, and she walked inside. She didn't come straight to our table. Instead, she stood near the counter pretending to read the menu. But every few seconds she glanced toward us. Ethan casually waved. She nodded. Then she ordered something from the cashier. For about 10 minutes, she sat at a table across the room drinking tea and occasionally looking over. Not hiding it either. Just observing. Other people in the cafe probably thought she was just another customer. But the entire time I knew exactly who she was. Eventually, she finished the drink, stood up, and walked out. As she passed our table, she smiled politely. Then she left the cafe. Ethan checked his phone again a minute later. Apparently, she texted him saying I seemed nice enough. He said it like it was good news. The rest of the day continued like that moment wasn't completely insane. We talked for another half hour. But the whole time I kept thinking about the fact that somewhere nearby a woman had been tracking her adult son's location and watching his date from a cafe table. When I finally left, the silver car was still parked across the street. I'm pretty sure someone was sitting inside. The moment she placed the stack of paper on the table, I already knew the date was over. But the strange part is that the night actually started out feeling like one of the most normal Hinge dates I had ever gone on. Nothing about the beginning hinted at what was coming. Her name was Marissa. We matched on Hinge after she liked one of my photos where I was standing next to a lake during a camping trip. Her profile looked pretty typical. A few pictures with friends, one photo at some street market holding a drink in a plastic cup, and one picture where she was sitting on a bench reading something. Her bio said she liked documentaries and long walks in random neighborhoods just to see what was there. That sounded normal enough. We messaged for about 5 days before setting up a date. The conversation was easy. Not overly exciting, but also not awkward. Just simple messages about food, movies, work, the usual things people cover when they're still figuring out if the other person is normal. She suggested meeting at a small wine bar that had just opened near the river. I had actually walked past it a few times, but never gone inside. Friday night, I showed up around 7. The place looked really nice inside. Small tables, dim lighting, candles on the bar, soft music playing somewhere in the background. It felt like one of those spots where people go on quiet dates instead of loud group nights. Marissa was already sitting at a table near the back when I walked in. First impression was that she looked almost exactly like her photos. Maybe a little more serious in person, but still friendly. She stood up, smiled, and we sat down. For the first 20 minutes, everything was completely normal. We ordered drinks. We talked about work. She worked at some marketing company and said she spent most of her day staring at spreadsheets. I told her about my job and how boring most of my meetings were. We talked about movies next, then travel, then random food places around town. It felt like a regular first date, the kind where you're slowly figuring out if you have anything in common. Around a half-hour mark, the conversation drifted toward how people meet online now. Dating apps, social media, that whole topic. She mentioned that before meeting someone, she likes to look them up online just to make sure they're real. I didn't think anything of it. Most people do that. If you have someone's first name in rough location, it's pretty easy to find their social media or something. So I laughed and said that made sense. Then she said she had looked me up too. Again, normal. I assumed she meant she found my Instagram or something. Then she reached down into her bag and pulled out a stack of paper. At first, I thought it was just a notebook or maybe something from work she forgot to take out of her bag. But when she placed it on the table, I realized it was printed pages. A thick stack. Maybe 10 or 12 sheets, all stapled together in the corner. She slid it across the table toward me. My name was printed at the top of the first page. For a second, I honestly thought it was some kind of joke. Like maybe she made a funny fake file for the date. But then I started flipping through the pages, and my stomach dropped. It was a full breakdown of everything she had found about me online. Not just basic stuff either. Page 1 had my full name and a list of social media accounts she believed belonged to me. Instagram, LinkedIn, an old Twitter account I hadn't used in years. Page 2 had screenshots of photos I had posted. Camping pictures, a picture of my dog, a group photo from a friend's birthday party. Page 3 had notes about my job, where I worked, how long I had been there, even a short summary of what the company did. Then there were sections about my hometown, my college, clubs I was apparently part of according to old posts. She had even found an article from a small local website that mentioned my name because I had helped organize a charity event in college. All of it printed, all of it highlighted in certain places. Some pages even had little notes written in the margins, questions she wanted to ask about specific things. The entire thing looked like a research project, or a report someone would give a teacher. Except the subject was me. She watched me flip through the pages like this was completely normal. Not embarrassed. Not joking. Just calmly waiting. I got to page 7 before I stopped. That page had a list of places I had apparently checked into online over the past few years. Restaurants, concert venues, random events. It was like a timeline of where I had been. Seeing all of it laid out on paper felt incredibly strange. Some of the information was old enough that I barely remembered it myself. Then I reached one of the final pages. That one had a section titled Possible Personality Traits. She had written guesses about what kind of person I might be based on the things she found online. Likes outdoor activities. Probably owns a car. Likely prefers small groups over large parties. The entire time she seemed proud of the research. Like this was impressive preparation for our first date. I kept flipping through the pages slowly because I couldn't quite believe what I was looking at. Near the end, there was even a page titled Open Questions. Things she wanted to confirm. Why I stopped posting on Twitter. Whether the dog in my pictures still live with me. What happened to a hiking group I appeared in several photos with. It felt less like a date and more like a background investigation. The weirdest part was how calm she was about it. She explained that she likes to gather as much information as possible before deciding whether someone is worth spending time with. Apparently, this wasn't the first time she had made a printed file like this. She said it helps her feel prepared. Prepared for what exactly I still don't know. Other people in the bar had no idea what was happening at our table. They were just drinking wine and talking quietly while I sat there staring at a 12-page printed breakdown of my life. Eventually, I closed the stack of paper and slid it back toward her. She put it neatly back into her bag like it was just another normal item. Then she picked up her drink and continued talking about movies again like nothing strange had happened. But after seeing all those pages, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time she asked a question, I wondered if the answer was already written somewhere in that file. When the date finally ended, I walked outside and stood on the sidewalk for a minute trying to process the whole thing. Somewhere in her bag was a 12-page document about me. Printed, organized, and apparently normal in her mind. I realized something was wrong the second I walked into the restaurant, but it took another 30 seconds for my brain to fully understand what I was looking at. The weird thing is that before that moment, the whole situation felt completely normal. His name was Aaron on Hinge, 28, worked in finance somewhere downtown. His profile looked like 100 other profiles I had already seen on the app. A few photos in nice shirts, one picture on a boat, one photo standing in front of a mountain with sunglasses on like every guy who has ever gone hiking once. His bio said he liked trying new restaurants and meeting people who were ambitious. Not the most exciting bio, but also not strange. We matched on a Sunday night and messaged back and forth for a few days. The conversation was easy enough. He seemed confident, maybe a little intense, but still normal. By Wednesday, he suggested meeting for dinner at this place that had just opened near the center of town. Apparently, it was known for burgers and craft drinks. I had never been there before, but the pictures online looked good. So we picked Friday evening around 7. The restaurant was busy when I arrived. Not packed, but busy enough that every table had someone sitting at it. The place had this modern industrial look with concrete walls and long hanging lights over the tables. Music was playing loud enough that people had to lean slightly closer to hear each other. I walked in and started scanning the tables. Aaron had said he would get there a little early to grab a seat. I spotted him pretty quickly near the back of the restaurant. But the second I saw the table, something felt off. He wasn't alone. There was a woman sitting across from him. At first, I assumed she was a friend who was leaving soon. Or maybe a coworker who had run into him before the date. Those things happen sometimes. But when I got closer, neither of them looked surprised to see me. Aaron smiled immediately. The woman looked up from her drink and also smiled, like she had been expecting me. That was the moment my brain started connecting the pieces. I walked up to the table, slowly trying to understand what was happening. Aaron stood up and greeted me like nothing was unusual. Then he introduced the woman sitting across from him. Her name was Jessica. She looked just as confused as I probably did, but also slightly amused. For a few seconds, none of us really knew how to act. Then Aaron explained the situation. Apparently, he had an idea about dating. A system. Instead of going on separate first dates with different people, he decided it would be more efficient to meet multiple people at the same time. That way he could compare chemistry in real time. Those were the exact words he used. Compare chemistry in real time. He said it like he was describing a new business strategy, not first date. I stood there for a moment trying to process the logic. Across the table, Jessica was doing the exact same thing. Aaron seemed completely proud of the idea. He explained that both of us matched with him on Hinge earlier in the week. He scheduled dinner with each of us around the same time. Then he decided to combine them. According to him, it saved time and made the process more honest. No guessing about how the connection compared to other dates. Everything happened in the same room. In his mind, it was brilliant. The restaurant around us continued like nothing strange was happening. People were laughing at other tables. Servers were carrying plates past us. Meanwhile, I had just arrived at what was apparently a live dating competition. Jessica finally laughed. Not in a mean way. More at the laugh someone makes when they realize they have accidentally walked into a weird situation. She said she had only arrived about 5 minutes before me. Aaron had just finished explaining the idea to her too, which meant she had already been sitting there processing the exact same information. Aaron encouraged both of us to sit down, like this was going to continue. For some reason, we both did. Probably because the situation was so bizarre that leaving immediately almost felt too abrupt. The server came over to ask if we wanted drinks. Aaron ordered something confidently like this was a normal group dinner. Jessica ordered a soda. I ordered a drink mostly because I needed a minute to figure out what to do. The first few minutes felt incredibly awkward. 3 people at a table that was clearly designed for 2. Aaron kept trying to start conversation topics like we were just friends meeting for dinner. But every few seconds, the reality of the situation would pop back into my head. This wasn't a group hangout. This was apparently a comparison test. Aaron even admitted that was the point. He said he thought it would help him see which connection felt more natural, which person he clicked with more easily. Jessica looked at me across the table, and we both had the same expression. Half confused, half entertained by how ridiculous it was. The conversation slowly turned into something strange. Sometimes Aaron would ask both of us the same question. Where we grew up. What we meant to do on weekends. Our favorite movies. It felt less like a date and more like a panel interview. At one point, he even commented on how interesting it was to hear 2 different answers side by side, like he was collecting data. The food arrived about 20 minutes later. 3 burgers. 3 plates of fries. People at nearby tables occasionally glanced over at us, probably wondering why the seating arrangement looked slightly tense. Aaron seemed completely relaxed. He kept talking about how modern dating takes too long and people waste weeks meeting people individually. This method fixed that problem. In his mind, this was the future. Jessica started leaning into the absurdity of it. She asked him questions about how he planned to choose a winner. He laughed that the word winner was a joke, but the concept clearly wasn't. Halfway through dinner, he mentioned that he would probably reflect on the conversation later tonight before deciding who he wanted to see again. That was the moment I realized he genuinely thought this system made sense, like we were both participating in a fair process. Meanwhile, Jessica and I started having our own side conversations across the table, mostly reacting to how strange the situation was. Aaron didn't even seem to notice. He was too focused on continuing the comparison. By the end of the meal, the whole table dynamic had shifted. Jessica and I were laughing quietly about the absurdity of the setup while Aaron kept trying to steer the discussion toward deeper questions about personality and goals. Eventually, the bill arrived. Aaron paid it without hesitation. Maybe part of his system. When we all stood up to leave, the night air outside felt weirdly normal compared to the restaurant. Jessica and I stood on the sidewalk for a moment while Aaron talked about how interesting the evening had been. Then he said he would message each of us later. Jessica and I looked at each other. Then she started laughing again. We walked in opposite directions down the street while Aaron stayed near the entrance of the restaurant checking something on his phone. I have no idea if he ever ran another group comparison date after that, but I know I was part of the first one. The date started with a sentence that should have warned me exactly how the night was going to go, but at the time I just laughed and assumed she was exaggerating. She told me she was a part-time psychic. Not joking either. She said it in the same tone someone would use to say they work weekends at a coffee shop. Casual, completely confident. The strange part is that even after hearing that, I still thought the night might be normal. Her name was Tessa. We matched on Hinge on a Monday night and talked for about a week before deciding to meet up. Her profile had a mix of photos that looked pretty typical. One picture hiking somewhere with a huge view behind her, another photo at what looked like a farmer's market, and one picture where she was holding a cup of tea with both hands like it was freezing outside. Her bio mentioned astrology and energy reading, but I assumed it was one of those things people put in their profile because they think it sounds interesting. A lot of people say they like crystals or tarot cards, and it usually just means they own a deck somewhere in their apartment. Nothing about the messages we exchanged felt too strange. She was actually pretty funny in text. Quick replies, lots of random stories about work and friends. At one point, she joked about how dating apps are basically auditions where everyone pretends they are more organized than they actually are. So by Friday evening, I was expecting a fairly normal date. We agreed to meet at a small taco place that stayed open late. It was one of those casual restaurants with colorful lights strung across the ceiling and music playing just loud enough to make conversations feel a little more private. When I walked in, she was already sitting at a table near the back. First impression was that she looked a lot like her pictures. Maybe a little more serious in person, but still friendly. She stood up, smiled, and we sat down. The first few minutes felt completely normal. We ordered drinks and talked about how long we had both been using Hinge. Then the conversation drifted into hobbies and random things we do after work. That was when she mentioned the psychic thing. She explained that she sometimes does readings for people on weekends. Energy readings, tarot cards, things like that. Apparently some of her friends started asking her to do it a few years ago, and then their friends asked too. Now she occasionally charged people for it. She said it like it was just another side job. I didn't know much about that stuff, so I mostly just nodded along. The tacos arrived and we started eating. For a few minutes, everything was still fine. Then something changed in her expression. It happened suddenly. She stopped eating mid-bite and looked at me very carefully. Not in a normal thinking way. More like she was studying something invisible in front of my face. She leaned back slightly and stared for a few seconds. Then she told me she was sensing something unusual. According to her, I was carrying negative X energy. That was the exact phrase. Negative X energy. I honestly thought she was joking again, but she looked completely serious. She explained that sometimes people hold emotional residue from past relationships and it can affect new connections. Apparently, she could feel it from across the table. At that point, I laughed because the situation sounded so ridiculous, but she didn't laugh back. Instead, she started reaching into her bag. At first, I assumed she was grabbing her phone or something normal. But then she pulled out a small bundle of dried leaves tied together with string. It took me a second to realize what it was. Sage. Actual sage. Then she pulled out a lighter. That was the moment I realized she was about to do something strange in the middle of this restaurant. Before I could even react, she lit the tip of the sage bundle. A small flame appeared for a second before turning into a thin line of smoke. The smell spread across the table almost instantly. Strong, earthy, very noticeable. People at the nearby tables started looking over. Meanwhile, she began slowly waving the smoke in my direction. Not aggressively, just calmly moving the bundle back and forth like she was painting the air. She said it was a cleansing ritual. Apparently, the sage would clear the negative energy surrounding me. All of this was happening in the middle of a taco restaurant on a Friday night. The smoke drifted across the table and up toward the ceiling lights. One of the servers walking past stopped for a second and stared. Tessa seemed completely focused on the ritual. She moved the sage in small circles around the table, then toward my shoulders, then back toward the space between us. At one point, she even stood up slightly to reach around the back of my chair with the smoke. I sat there frozen, trying to figure out how this situation became real. The smell of burning sage kept getting stronger. A couple at the next table whispered to each other while watching. Another group further back started glancing over every few seconds. Tessa closed her eyes for a moment while holding the smoking bundle above the table. Then she slowly waved it again across the air in front of my chest. Apparently, the energy was clearing. That was what she said. After about 2 minutes, the smoke alarm near the kitchen made a small warning chirp. Not a full alarm yet. Just a quick beep. One of the staff members walked over looking extremely confused. The moment they saw the burning sage, their expression changed from confusion to disbelief. Tessa calmly blew out the ember and placed the sage bundle back into her bag. The smoke continued drifting upward for another minute. The staff member asked if everything was okay. Tessa explained she had just completed a quick cleansing. The staff members stared at both of us for a second like they were trying to decide if this was a joke. Then they walked away slowly. Around us, the restaurant noise slowly returned to normal, but people were still looking over occasionally. Tessa sat back down and took another bite of her taco like nothing unusual had happened. She said the energy around me felt much lighter now. Apparently the ritual worked. The rest of the day continued in the strangest way. She kept analyzing little shifts in what she called the atmosphere between us. Meanwhile, I couldn't stop thinking about the moment she lit sage at the table like we were inside some kind of ceremony. By the time the bill arrived, the smell of smoke had mostly faded, but the memory of it hung in the air. We walked outside after paying. The cool night air felt normal again. Before leaving, she told me I should be careful about who I let close to my energy in the future. Then she waved goodbye and walked down the street. When I got back to my car, my jacket still smelled like sage. I knew the night was going to be strange the second the server walked up to the table and the guy I had just met started ordering food for both of us like he had already memorized my entire personality. The weird part is that I hadn't even opened the menu yet. The menu was still sitting in front of me completely untouched when he started pointing at things and listing off dishes like he had been planning this moment all day. At first, I thought he was just being confident. Some people do that on dates. They like to recommend food or suggest something they think is good. I've had dates where someone says the tacos are amazing and you should try them. That's normal. This was not that. His name was Victor. We matched on Hinge about a week before the date. His profile made him seem like one of those guys who takes everything in life very seriously. All his pictures were very polished. Nice clothes, clean background, perfect lighting like every photo had been planned. His bio said he believed in structure and intentional choices. At the time, that sounded like he was just organized. We messaged for a few days and eventually he suggested meeting for dinner at a small restaurant downtown that served Mediterranean food. I had actually heard good things about the place. So Friday evening I showed up around 7. The restaurant was busy but not chaotic. Dim lighting, small tables close together, music playing quietly somewhere near the bar. It was one of those places where the servers moved quickly between tables carrying plates that smelled amazing. Victor was already sitting at a table near the window when I walked in. First impression was that he looked exactly like his pictures. Very put together. Nice shirt, watch, hair perfectly in place like he had checked it in the mirror 10 times before arriving. He stood up, shook my hand in a very formal way, and we sat down. The first few minutes were completely normal. We talked about work. He worked in consulting somewhere in the city and talked about his schedule like it was a military operation. Meetings planned weeks in advance, workouts scheduled at exact times every morning, everything very precise. I remember thinking he seemed intense but still normal enough. Then the server came to take our order. That's when the night changed. Before I'd even touched the menu, Victor started ordering food. Not just for himself. For both of us. He listed several dishes quickly. Some kind of grilled lamb plate, roasted vegetables, a salad, and a side I had never heard of before. The server nodded and wrote everything down like it was a completely standard order. Meanwhile, I was sitting there trying to understand what just happened. The server left with the menus still sitting on the table. Victor leaned back in his chair like the most natural thing in the world had just occurred. Then he explained why he ordered for both of us. Apparently, it was part of something he called the compatibility test. According to him, food choices reveal a lot about a person. He believed that if two people were meant to be together, they should enjoy the same meals without needing to negotiate every decision. So instead of asking what I wanted, he picked the dishes he thought represented his taste. If I liked them, that meant we were aligned. If I didn't like them, that meant the relationship probably wouldn't work anyway. That was the logic. I honestly thought he might be joking. But his face stayed completely serious. He explained that this method saves time. No pretending to like things just to be polite. No long discussions about preferences. Just a direct test. The food arrives. You eat it. Then you see what happens. Meanwhile, the restaurant around us was full of people having normal dinners. Couples leaning across tables talking quietly. Friends laughing over drinks. and I was sitting there realizing the meal had turned into some kind of personality exam. A few minutes later, the drinks arrived. Victor ordered wine for the table without asking about that either. He poured both glasses and took a sip like everything was perfectly normal. The conversation after that felt strange. He asked me questions about work and hobbies, but every few minutes he reminded me that the food would reveal more than the conversation. Apparently people can say anything during a date, but the reaction to a meal is more honest. About 20 minutes later, the plates started arriving. The lamb dish first, then the vegetables, then the salad and the side dish. The table suddenly looked like a small feast. The smell was incredible, but the pressure around the meal made it feel like something else entirely. Victor watched very carefully when I took the first bite. Not in a casual way. In a focused, analytical way. Like a scientist observing an experiment. I chewed slowly, mostly because I was aware he was studying my reaction. The lamb tasted good. Very good, actually. But the situation made it hard to react normally. He nodded slightly like the first phase of the test was successful. Then he encouraged me to try the vegetables next. Again, he watched closely while I ate. Apparently, my reaction mattered more than the flavor. Halfway through the meal, he explained that he had used this system on several previous dates. Some people failed immediately. Others made it halfway through dinner before revealing they didn't like something. One person apparently refused to eat the salad because they hated olives. According to Victor, that was a clear sign the relationship would never work. Listening to him talk about past dates like eliminated contestants made the whole thing feel even stranger. Every bite felt like part of a scoreboard. At one point, I mentioned that I don't usually eat lamb very often. Victor paused for a second after hearing that. Not angry, just thoughtful. Like he was updating some invisible chart in his head. The rest of the dinner continued with the same strange energy. Every dish came with observation. Every reaction felt recorded. The weirdest moment happened near the end when he asked if I would willingly order the exact same meal again next time. Apparently that question mattered just as much as the tasting. By the time the plates were mostly empty, I felt like I had taken some kind of strange personality test disguised as dinner. Victor paid the bill without hesitation. I noticed the total printed on the receipt was around $86. Then we stood up and walked outside into the cool night air. He said he would reflect on the results of the compatibility test later. That was the phrase he used. Results. Then he said he would let me know if the alignment looked promising. I walked back to my car trying to process the fact that dinner had just been treated like a scientific trial. To this day, I have no idea if I passed his test. I thought I was prepared for anything by the time I got to the little cafe on the corner of the street, but nothing could have readied me for what actually happened. The moment I walked in and saw her sitting there alone, smiling at me like everything was perfectly normal, I had a weird sense of calm. I told myself I had met people with quirks before. People who were intense about certain hobbies or had unusual collections. That was fine. I could handle quirks. Her name was Lily. We matched on Hinge late one night while I was scrolling through profiles half asleep. Her pictures were cute in a very normal way. One with a cup of coffee in her hands, one holding a huge bouquet of sunflowers, one crouching down next to a dog. The last one was her claim to fame on her profile because she mentioned she loved dogs in her bio. I had nodded at it while swiping. Dogs are fine. Dogs are normal. Dogs are friendly. That was fine. We had texted back and forth for a week. Mostly small talk about work, weekend plans, random jokes. She seemed funny in that text way where someone can string together sentences that feel like you've known them for longer than 5 days. Nothing alarming. No weird energy. Completely normal for Hinge. Friday evening, I got there first. The cafe had one of those cozy neighborhood vibes with a bunch of little tables close together, soft yellow lights hanging from the ceiling, and a counter with a display of pastries that smelled too good. There were a few people scattered around, some working on laptops, some sipping lattes quietly. Lily arrived a few minutes later, walking in like she owned the place in the most casual way. She waved at me, and we got a table near the window. That's when the normal part ended. The first 20 minutes were fine. We talked about work, what we did for fun, what kind of movies we liked. She mentioned again that she loved dogs, and I thought, sure, okay, cool. I like dogs too. She laughed when I said that, and it seemed normal. The drinks arrived, the little iced lattes we had ordered, and everything was still chill. Then it happened. Out of nowhere, she started whistling, just casually. I thought she was just humming a tune until I realized she was doing it in a very specific rhythm, and she was doing it directly at the cafe window. The next second, I saw movement outside. A small shadow flicked across the street, then another, and another. By the time I realized what I was looking at, 5 stray dogs had appeared from nowhere and were running toward the cafe. Not walking, not wandering, sprinting straight to the window. My stomach dropped. People in the cafe started noticing. Some turned around curious. A few others stepped back like they were afraid the dogs might burst through the door. And the dogs didn't hesitate. They ran right inside. They were all different breeds, all scruffy and dirty, but all of them seemed intensely focused on the table where Lily and I were sitting. It was like they had been summoned, which I guess they kind of had. Lily just smiled calmly and said she had been meaning to show me this trick. She had this weird, serene confidence like it was the most normal thing in the world for 5 stray dogs to materialize in a cafe in the middle of a Friday night. I froze. One of the dogs jumped up on the chair next to me and sniffed my leg. Another started circling around the table. The smell of wet fur mixed with the smell of coffee and pastries. People around us started murmuring and pointing, some laughing nervously, some looking genuinely alarmed. The server stopped mid-step, holding a tray of drinks, completely frozen. Lily continued talking like nothing was happening. She leaned over and whispered that she loved dogs because they could sense energy, that these ones had been hanging around the street waiting for her call, that she sometimes used her whistle to bring them in for good vibes or whatever. By this point, I was sitting there holding my latte like it had any power to protect me from the strange animal energy in front of me. One of the bigger dogs had jumped onto the table and was sniffing the edge of my plate. I swatted it gently, but Lily gently told me to let it be. She said it was fine. The dogs were just checking the energy. The chaos escalated. Another dog tried to sneak out the door when the server finally moved, but Lily whistled again, soft this time, and it spun back around and ran toward the table. I couldn't stop thinking about how normal she looked. Calm, smiling, sipping her coffee. Like this was a casual Friday for her. I tried to talk to her about normal things, like where she worked and the last movie she saw, but my voice kept catching because there was a stray dog standing on its hind legs trying to reach my drink, another one sniffing under the table, and another sitting right across from me like it was joining the date. People around us were filming. I noticed a couple at the next table pointing their phones at us, probably thinking this was some viral social media moment. The barista was peeking over the counter, shaking their head. The cafe owner came out from the back and froze in the doorway. And Lily just kept smiling. She said the dogs wouldn't leave until the energy in the room was balanced, which I thought might have been the first sign I was in over my head. I couldn't tell if she was joking, but the intensity in her eyes said she wasn't. Then something weirder happened. One of the smaller dogs climbed onto my lap. I tried to gently move it, but Lily told me to let it sit there. Apparently, I was absorbing the energy. I was stuck between laughing, panicking, and trying to figure out how I was going to survive the rest of this date. Every few minutes, Lily whistled again, and the dogs shifted around like a choreographed routine. One even barked once, and every head in the cafe turned to look at us. Somehow the date continued in this bizarre way. She talked about favorite movies, hobbies, astrology, and energy, while 5 stray dogs either sat at the table, sniffed my shoes, or danced around like this was a rehearsal for some secret canine audition. Every time she mentioned loving dogs, she looked like she was confessing a sacred truth. At one point, I tried to subtly suggest that maybe it was time for the dogs to go, but she waved it off, smiling serenely. According to her, they were part of the date now. She called it an experience, an energy connection. Eventually, the dogs wandered back out the door when Lily whistled one last time. The cafe was quiet again, except for a few murmurs and people trying not to stare. The server returned, carefully placing new drinks down like nothing had happened, though I could see them still glancing at the window. Lily sipped her latte, completely normal again. She asked how I liked the energy portion of the date. I nodded slowly. My brain still hadn't caught up. My jacket smelled faintly of dog fur. A few stray hairs stuck to my sleeve. I don't think I had blinked in 20 minutes straight. By the time we walked out into the street, the night air felt calm, almost like the normal world had resumed. I kept looking over my shoulder to see if any of the dogs had followed. None had. We parted ways shortly after that. She waved, smiled, and walked down the street, as if nothing unusual had just occurred. I got back to my car and realized that my hoodie smelled like wet fur and city air. Somehow I was still alive, but part of me couldn't stop thinking about the whistle, the timing, and how eerily calm she had been while commanding what felt like a pack of wild dogs. I thought I had been on bad Hinge dates before, but nothing could have prepared me for this. I walked into the little Italian place thinking it was going to be casual, maybe a laugh or two over pasta and wine, and somewhere around the middle of dinner, everything completely fell apart in a way I didn't see coming. His name was Jason. We matched midweek, one of those matches where the conversation seemed normal but polite. His profile had the usual pictures, him laughing with friends, some outdoorsy hiking shots, and one in a very obviously staged gym selfie. His bio said he liked adventures and good food, which I didn't think was strange at first. I thought we were a decent match. Nothing in the text raised any red flags. He seemed funny in that dry, sarcastic way, and I thought I could handle a first date with a little awkwardness. I arrived first. The restaurant was the kind of place where the lighting was dim but warm, small candles on each table, and soft Italian music playing in the background. The smell of garlic and tomato sauce hit me when I walked in, and I immediately thought, yeah, this is a good spot. Jason arrived a few minutes later, walking in like he owned the place, giving me a polite nod and sliding into the chair across from me. First impression, slightly more polished than his pictures suggested, but normal enough. We started with wine, small talk about work, our weekends, favorite movies. Everything was pretty standard until the food arrived. Midway through the second course, after we had been eating for maybe 20 minutes, Jason leaned back and casually mentioned that he was actually part of a live stream called First Dates Ranked. At first I laughed. I thought he was joking. Maybe some absurd reality show thing. But he was dead serious. Apparently, thousands of people were watching us eat, watch us interact, and voting in real time on whether he should stay at the date or leave. I froze. My stomach dropped. My wine glass felt suddenly too heavy in my hand. He didn't even seem nervous. He explained that the live stream had started as a small experiment among his friends, but it had gone viral. Viewers could comment, vote, and even give suggestions on conversation topics, how he should behave, and whether he should bail on the date altogether. I kept waiting for him to say he was kidding. He didn't. He pulled out his phone and showed me some of the live comments scrolling by, thousands of usernames giving ratings on everything I was saying, on my gestures, on my laugh, and most disturbingly, on whether I was date material according to them. People were voting whether he should leave. I couldn't even comprehend that. Hundreds, maybe thousands of strangers deciding in real time if I was good enough for this one dinner. He smiled like it was casual, like this was completely normal. Meanwhile, my brain refused to catch up. The conversation got harder. Every word I said felt performative, but at the same time, I had no idea how to act natural when I realized every little thing was being judged. I could feel the tension building in the air. The waiter brought another round of drinks, and Jason gave me a polite smile, nodding like he was acknowledging the audience. It was surreal. At some point, I noticed people at the next table staring. I could tell they were curious, but not realizing exactly why I looked frozen in my chair. Jason explained that this audience loved drama. He said they sometimes influenced his actions, telling him to leave abruptly or to make unexpected comments. The thought of strangers essentially controlling a part of my evening lie at zero save made me feel trapped. By the time the main course arrived, I wasn't hungry. The smell of the pasta was overwhelming, but I couldn't focus on it. Every gesture I made felt like it was being dissected. My laugh, my attempts to make conversation, my body language, it was all data for thousands of strangers. Jason kept checking his phone subtly between bites, reading comments, laughing quietly at some, smirking at others. It was impossible to tell whether he cared more about the meal or the audience. I kept trying to keep the conversation normal. I asked about his work, hobbies, favorite restaurants. He answered, sometimes consulting the comments subtly before responding. It was like the date had three participants now: me, him, and the invisible audience influencing everything. At one point, the comment suggested he should do something bold, like ask me a very personal question or make a sudden move to leave. He glanced at the phone, smirked, and asked a question that felt totally off, like it had been generated by someone halfway across the world. I couldn't even react normally because my brain was too busy screaming that this was insane. Around the halfway point, I started to notice other diners shifting in their seats. Some were whispering, some glancing at us with curiosity. One waiter paused while delivering a dessert to another table and just stared, as if sensing that something in our corner of the restaurant was completely off. Jason didn't seem fazed. He occasionally laughed at comments or whispered back at his phone, like he was negotiating with a crowd of invisible strangers. It was like the date wasn't just a date anymore. It was a performance with thousands of unseen judges controlling the script. I tried to excuse myself to the restroom just to take a breath, but I realized even then that the audience could probably see that as well. The whole night felt like I was trapped in some distorted version of social media where every moment was lived, every word had consequences, and nothing felt private. By the time the last course was being cleared, I was exhausted. I didn't know if I had laughed too much, too little, or made a single wrong move. Every bite of dessert felt like it was part of a test I hadn't signed up for. Jason casually mentioned that he had been ranked in the top 10 most popular first date hosts on the platform, and that sometimes viewers rewarded him if he stayed longer with someone particularly engaging. The fact that he seemed proud of this made it even more disturbing. We eventually got up to leave. The audience had been active the entire time, voting in real time, watching our every move, and influencing the way Jason reacted to me. He walked me to my car like it was a completely normal gesture, but I was hyper aware that this normal had been mediated by thousands of strangers on a live stream. My jacket smelled faintly of dinner and the faint anxiety that had been clinging to me the entire night. I got back to my apartment and sat down, trying to process the fact that half my date had essentially been performed for thousands of people without my consent. I kept thinking about the faces in the comments, the usernames, the constant judgment, the weird thrill he seemed to get from letting strangers decide if he should stay or leave. Even now, when I think about that night, it's hard to shake the memory of the scrolling comments, the way he smiled at his phone while pretending everything was normal, and the intense feeling that the whole dinner had never been about getting to know each other. It was about performance, ratings, and control, and somehow I had been pulled into it without even realizing it. I thought I knew what awkward dates were. I thought I had seen it all after a few bad Hinge matches, but nothing prepared me for this. From the moment I walked into the cafe, I had that weird mix of excitement and dread that comes with meeting someone new, thinking maybe this one could be fun. Little did I know it would turn into a full-blown digital nightmare that I couldn't pause or rewind. Her name was Clara. We matched on Hinge late one Sunday night when I was scrolling half asleep, and she seemed like the kind of girl who was cute, funny in her texts, and maybe a little extra. Her profile had some normal stuff, a picture at a beach, one in a coffee shop, one holding a dog, but something in the way she wrote made me laugh quietly, the kind of laugh where you feel like you might actually want to meet her. I got to the cafe a few minutes early. It was one of those quirky, artsy spots with exposed brick walls, bookshelves full of worn novels, and lights strung across the ceiling like tiny stars. It smelled like roasted coffee beans and something sugary from the pastry counter. A little cozy chaos of students with laptops and people laughing quietly over late lunches. Claire arrived 5 minutes later, perfectly dressed but casually so, carrying that air of confidence that made me feel both nervous and slightly relieved. We ordered drinks and got a corner table near the window, the kind of spot where you can watch the street without feeling exposed. Conversation started easy. Work, weekend plans, favorite shows. She laughed a lot. I laughed a lot. The usual first date dance. Drinks came, followed by food, and everything felt normal. I thought maybe, just maybe, this could be a date that didn't make me cringe later. Then she asked if I minded taking a photo together. I smiled, figured sure, and we leaned close for a quick snap. She took the phone, flipped it around, and suddenly I felt a small pit open in my stomach. The next thing I knew, she was uploading it to Instagram, and my brain could barely process what was happening. In the caption she wrote, "My boyfriend." I froze mid-chew, the fork in my hand hovering above my plate. My mind raced through everything I knew about this girl. Texts, laughs, shared jokes, nothing had hinted at this. And yet here I was, officially labeled online in a way I hadn't consented to, a title that implied a relationship that didn't exist. People in the cafe were still around, some noticing the subtle tension. I could see a few glances toward our table as she continued scrolling, adding stories, filters, all while I sat there trying to figure out how to respond without making things weirder. Clara didn't seem to notice my panic. She looked at me and smiled like it was completely normal, like the caption was nothing, like she hadn't just crossed an invisible line of first date etiquette. My head was spinning. I kept thinking about notifications, about friends who might see this, people I worked with. The digital imprint of this date was now out there, branding me without permission, and Clara seemed completely fine with it. It wasn't just awkward, it was invasive. I tried to steer the conversation back to normal topics, mentioning something about a movie I had seen recently, but my brain kept wandering back to the phone, the photo, the caption. I could almost feel my social image slipping through my fingers. The idea of friends seeing this post, assuming things, thinking I was in a relationship, I could feel my anxiety mounting with every second. Then she leaned back and started showing me some of the responses she was already getting. Likes, hearts, comments from people congratulating her, tagging friends, making jokes about her new boyfriend. My pulse spiked. I couldn't believe this was happening. Every bite of food suddenly felt heavy. Every laugh she gave felt performative. I couldn't tell if she realized how disturbing this was, or if she genuinely thought this was normal first date behavior. People outside the cafe occasionally glanced in, and I swear I could feel the tension in the room. The staff walked by a few times, giving us polite nods, oblivious to what had just been broadcast to the digital world. I tried to focus on Clara, on talking normally, but the entire date had already shifted. The line between private and public had been obliterated in one instant. I realized I wasn't eating much anymore. My hands shook slightly as I stirred my drink, trying to come up with some way to reclaim control, some way to make it stop. But she kept scrolling, double tapping, adding a story, chatting with someone over text about how cute my boyfriend looked. Each notification sounded like a little hammer in my brain, pounding the reality that this wasn't just a weird joke, this was happening, and there was nothing I could do to erase it. As the main course arrived, I could barely focus. The food was fine, the flavors normal, but I couldn't taste anything. My mind was stuck on the image she had created online, on the thousands of potential viewers, on the fact that she had assumed ownership of a relationship that didn't exist yet. Every gesture I made, every laugh, every sip of coffee, it all felt like it had been stolen, turned into content without permission. At one point, she casually mentioned showing the post to some friends who were curious. My heart skipped. I tried to act casual, but it was impossible. I kept imagining every friend, coworker, neighbor, anyone who might know me, seeing that caption, seeing the photo, thinking it was real. I didn't say anything because I didn't know if protesting would make it worse or if it would make me look like the crazy one. By the time dessert came, the atmosphere had changed completely. We weren't having a date anymore. We were having a performance. Everything I did was under a microscope, not just hers but mine too, because now she expected me to play along. Laughing, smiling, pretending it was normal, pretending it didn't feel like some invasive digital kidnapping of my social persona. The dessert came, and I barely touched it. Clara was cheerful, scrolling, tagging friends, maybe adding another story, maybe checking notifications, completely oblivious or uncaring to the fact that my idea of boundaries had been violated. My mind was racing through options: leave now, confront her, delete the photo if I could, but every scenario felt powerless. She had already framed the narrative, cast me in a role, and I had no say. When the bill came, I paid in a kind of trance, barely registering the total. We walked outside, the air cold and crisp, and she gave me a quick hug. I could feel the smile in her expression, like she thought this had been a normal end to a first date. The caption still burned in my mind, still flashing over every thought: my boyfriend. By the time I got home, I checked my phone, half expecting that she had changed the caption or deleted the post. She hadn't. The post was still there, the comments accumulating, the likes rolling in, and my digital identity had been hijacked without warning. I sat on my couch, staring at the screen, realizing that the entire night had been a lesson in control, not connection. I hadn't just gone on a bad Hinge date. I had gone on a date where my reality was rewritten for the digital audience, and had no choice in the matter. Even now, when I think about that night, I remember the way her smile never faltered, the way she held her phone like it was a third participant in the conversation, and the way my social image had been stolen in the span of one single photo. The caption, the emoji, the assumption, it all sits in my memory like a warning that some people see the world as content to be created, and everyone else is just a prop. I honestly didn't think I could feel that level of unease on a first date. I've had awkward Hinge dates before, sure, but nothing prepared me for the way this one spiraled so quickly into something that felt completely off kilter. From the start, he seemed perfectly normal, too normal, maybe, in a way that didn't set off alarm bells yet. His name was Mark. We matched on Hinge late on a Tuesday, and his profile seemed straightforward. Some hiking photos, a dog, a couple of shots with friends, and a bio that said he liked cooking and reading. Nothing flashy, nothing weird, nothing that screamed red flag, so I agreed to meet him at a small downtown bistro I've been meaning to try. I got there first, like usual, nervously scanning the place. The bistro was cozy and dimly lit, with exposed wood beams and small hanging Edison bulbs. There were candles on every table, and a faint smell of garlic, roasted vegetables, and fresh bread filled the air. He arrived 10 minutes later, sliding into the chair across from me with a polite smile and a slightly nervous laugh that somehow made the situation feel normal. We ordered drinks, him a sparkling water, me a glass of white wine, and started with the usual first date chatter, work, hobbies, favorite shows. Everything felt normal, almost too smooth. He laughed at the right times, listened when I spoke, and seemed genuinely interested without trying too hard. The appetizers came, and we dug in. The conversation stayed easy. He told me about his weekend hiking trip, and I shared a recent cooking disaster that ended in way too much smoke in my kitchen. I thought, okay, this is fine. I might even enjoy myself. As dinner went on, the unease hadn't hit yet. I was thinking he might actually be the kind of normal first date person who existed outside of Hinge, the kind of date you could walk away from and tell your friends about without cringing. He seemed like someone who could maybe turn into a boyfriend someday. I started imagining what a second date might look like, and I realized how quickly my brain had decided he was safe. Then dessert arrived. The waiter came out carrying a small, round cake on a silver platter. At first, I thought it was for another table, but as he placed it in front of us, I noticed the icing words written in careful cursive. Happy 3-month anniversary. My brain froze. I looked at Mark. His face was calm, smiling even like this was normal behavior. My stomach sank into a pit I didn't know I had. He told me that he liked to manifest long relationships early, that setting intentions was part of how he approached dating. I tried to process this. 3 months. We had literally just met. A first date, maybe second date material, and suddenly he was talking like we were already a couple with a small milestone to celebrate. My fork trembled in my hand. I couldn't even bring myself to cut the cake because the words seemed to echo in my head. 3 months. Happy. Anniversary. The atmosphere in the bistro suddenly felt heavier. I could hear the faint clinking of glasses and silverware from other tables, but it was like the world around me had slowed down. I could feel people glancing at us, probably noticing the cake, noticing how tense I had gone, noticing the strange energy radiating from our corner. Mark, on the other hand, was completely at ease, chatting as if a cake announcing a non-existent 3-month milestone was entirely normal for a first date. I tried to laugh it off, making some comment about how premature the celebration was, but it came out hollow. The waiter lingered a moment longer, smiling politely, like he was unsure if he should ask questions or leave us alone. I realized in that instant that Mark had planned this in advance. He had probably called ahead or left a note saying, Happy 3-month anniversary, and somehow manipulated the restaurant into being part of his manifestation. My mind was spinning, and I had no idea how to respond. As we picked at the cake, Mark explained more about his intentions philosophy. He believed in visualizing long-term commitment from day one. He mentioned that he often did this with past partners, that it helped the relationship grow faster. I felt my stomach tighten further. Every word he said made me feel smaller, like I was being swept into a narrative that didn't belong to me. I kept thinking about how insane it was to celebrate 3 months when we had literally just finished dinner. The math didn't exist. The timeline was fiction. And yet here I was, sitting across from him, forced to participate in it. I tried to focus on the small, normal things around me, the smell of the cake, the soft lighting, the quiet chatter of other diners, but every time I did, my brain snapped back to the cake. It sat there in front of me like a warning, a monument to the speed at which normal dating boundaries could dissolve in front of your eyes. My hands hovered near my wine glass, shaking slightly, and I felt sweat start forming at my hairline. I had to remind myself to breathe. Mark seemed oblivious to my discomfort. He was animated, talking about hobbies, funny childhood stories, the usual stuff that would feel engaging if it weren't for the massive emotional landmine sitting in the middle of our table. I couldn't stop thinking about why someone would even do this. It wasn't just a cake. It was a statement, a boundary invasion, a declaration of an imagined future I hadn't agreed to. The calm way he presented it made it feel like a trap. Around the time coffee came, I started scanning the room. Other diners had moved on, most unaware of what was happening at our table. But I couldn't shake the feeling that even in their oblivion, I had been marked by this experience. I couldn't unsee the way the icing letters glared at me, reminding me that Mark's perception of reality didn't match mine. What kind of person brings a 3-month anniversary cake to a first date and thinks that's normal? By the time the check came, I was exhausted. Not physically, but mentally and emotionally. I couldn't even enjoy the rest of dessert, barely touched it. Paying the bill felt like a final act of reclaiming some control, but even then, the memory of the cake lingered like a shadow. I walked out of the bistro in a dazed, cold evening air hitting me, trying to anchor myself to reality. I kept thinking about it on the way home. How someone could move so fast in their own mind, how they could try to drag someone else into their timeline, how casual it all felt to him. Mark had manifested something in his head, and I had been an unwilling participant in his fantasy. The whole night became a blur of normalcy overlaid with a thin, creeping sense of wrongness. Even now, when I think about that date, I see the cake first. I see the careful icing letters spelling out a future that hadn't happened. I see Mark smiling, completely unbothered, proud even. I remember the pit in my stomach, the racing thoughts, the feeling that I had been pulled into a story I didn't consent to. It wasn't just a bad date. It was a small, subtle horror, a glimpse of someone else's perception of reality colliding with mine, and the chilling ease with which he tried to merge the two. I thought I had seen weird first dates, the kind that make you cringe later when telling friends. But nothing prepared me for this one. From the moment I saw her walking up the sidewalk outside the little brunch spot, I had a weird mix of curiosity and caution. She looked normal enough, jeans, sneakers, a hoodie tied around her waist, but there was something in the way she carried herself, a kind of intensity I couldn't place. Her name was Olivia. We matched on Hinge during one of those late Sunday scrolls when I was half asleep and mostly swiping out of boredom. Her profile was simple: a few pictures with a dog, a hiking trail, and a smoothie bowl she proudly held up like some kind of culinary achievement. Nothing screamed danger, but something in her bio about health first always gave me a little pause, the kind you don't notice until it's too late. I got to the cafe first, nervously scanning the room. It was one of those modern brunch spots with exposed brick walls, hanging ferns, and a wall of tiny potted succulents. The smell of coffee and toasted bagels filled the air, mixed with something faintly sweet. I picked a table near the window so I could people watch without being too obvious. A few tables over, a group of students were laughing loudly, and the barista was juggling 2 orders while the espresso machine hissed. The usual cozy chaos. She walked in 10 minutes later, scanning the room until she spotted me. Her smile was wide, like she had been practicing it in the mirror all week, and she waved as she approached. I stood up, feeling that nervous flutter you get when meeting someone in person for the first time. Everything seemed normal. We exchanged greetings and sat down, ordered drinks, me a coffee, her a tea, and started talking. The conversation was easy at first. Work, hobbies, weekend plans, the kind of small talk that helped you figure out if someone is actually interesting or just charming in text. She laughed at my jokes, asked questions, nodded at the right moments. I thought, okay, this is going fine. Normal. Maybe even enjoyable. Then she said she didn't drink. At first I thought that was just a preference. Fine, more coffee for me, no problem. But what happened next made my jaw drop and my brain loop in panic. Without warning, she reached into her oversized tote bag and pulled out a tiny blender. A real, working, portable blender, the kind you can charge and take anywhere. She started unpacking it like it was the most normal thing in the world. I froze mid-sip of my coffee, unsure if I had misheard or imagined it. She was measuring protein powder, grabbing frozen berries from a small bag she produced from another compartment of her purse, and adding a liquid I couldn't immediately identify. I stared at her, trying to process that this woman had just pulled out a fully functional kitchen appliance in a public cafe mid-date. The other diners started glancing over. A few whispered, some stared openly, and a toddler in a nearby high chair giggled, probably sensing something unusual. She didn't seem to care. She put the lid on the blender, pressed the button, and it whirred to life on the table, making a whirring noise that sounded like an industrial vacuum. The tiny motor vibrated against the wooden tabletop. The smoothie smelled faintly sweet and a little chalky from the protein powder. My stomach twisted. I tried to act casual, thinking maybe this was just a quirky health thing, but she didn't pause. She added greens, some almond milk, and even a scoop of peanut butter straight into the tiny blender. The whirring got louder, and small flecks of green powder dusted the table. I noticed a few people at other tables craning their necks, snapping discreet photos with their phones. The barista looked confused, like he wasn't sure if he should intervene or let it play out. When the blender stopped, she poured the smoothie into a reusable cup she also pulled from her bag and took a sip, smiling contentedly. She then handed it to me like an offering, clearly expecting me to try it. I politely declined, saying I wasn't hungry, but she just laughed and said it was for energy. I felt trapped. She had basically converted the table into a mini kitchen without asking, and I had no idea how to respond without making things awkward. The rest of the day followed the same chaotic rhythm. She kept the blender on the table, occasionally turning it on to make smaller shots of something else, protein, greens, some kind of powder that smelled faintly metallic. I tried to focus on conversation, but every time I looked at her, she was already pulling out another container from her bag, measuring spoon in hand, ready to create another tiny concoction. I started to notice little details I hadn't before. How her bag had compartments specifically for these powders, how she got multiple reusable cups, and how precise she was with measurements. This wasn't casual. This was a full ritual she had practiced before even showing up. At one point, she leaned over, blending something right on the edge of the table, and I had to nudge my chair back to avoid being splattered. The whirring sound drew more attention now, and I could see some of the other diners exchanging looks of disbelief. But she seemed completely at ease, as if everyone in the cafe was her audience, and she was performing a health demonstration. My meal sat half-eaten because I couldn't focus on eating. My eyes kept darting to the blender, to the powders, to the way she orchestrated this miniature health ritual like it was perfectly normal. Even when dessert came, a small slice of chocolate cake I had ordered, she ignored it completely, preferring to measure out a scoop of protein and another leafy green powder to add to her blender. I tried to take a bite, but every crunch and chew was overshadowed by the constant whirring and the faint smell of almond milk and spinach. By the end of the meal, I felt like I had been trapped in some alternate reality where a first date was really a test of how much absurdity you could tolerate. Paying the bill was surreal. The barista had even commented on the blender, laughing nervously. I tried to act normal, but my mind was still spinning. I walked out of the cafe with her, the evening air crisp against my skin, and I felt a mix of relief and lingering unease. It wasn't just that she had a blender in her bag. It was the casual way she had normalized something that no reasonable person would expect on a first date. She had turned a quiet brunch into a spectacle, and I had been unwillingly cast as part of it. Even now, when I think about that date, I see the tiny blender first. I see the whirring, the dusting of green powder, the precise scoops of protein, the way she smiled like this was completely ordinary. I remember my hands hovering near my coffee cup, hesitant to reach for anything, hesitant to make a move that might disrupt the ritual. That date wasn't just awkward or weird. It was a full-on display of someone else's obsession, an invasion of normal dining space, and a level of unself-conscious absurdity I hadn't thought existed in real life. I thought I had a pretty good sense of what weird first dates looked like until this one. It started out normal enough, at least on the surface. I matched with this guy, Derek, on Hinge after a few days of polite messaging. His pictures were fine. Him hiking, a dog in one photo, a coffee cup in another. His bio said he was driven, passionate, always growing, which is pretty generic, but okay. I didn't think much of it. Figured we'd just meet, talk, see if there was chemistry, and call it a night if not. I got to the cafe a few minutes early. It was one of those tiny spots tucked between a record store and a vintage clothing shop, the kind with hand-painted signs, local art on the walls, and a faint smell of espresso and bagels. I picked a table in the corner so I could scope out the place without feeling like I was on display. A barista was hustling behind the counter, and a couple of people were at a small table nearby, laptops open, headphones in. He arrived right on time, dressed in what I would later realize was his motivational uniform, tailored joggers, a fitted tee that showed he worked out, and sneakers that probably cost more than my entire dinner. He smiled and waved, sat down across from me, and immediately launched into talking. That's when I noticed the first weird thing. He didn't answer any questions normally. I asked what he did for work, thinking I'd get something like marketing or design, maybe tech. Instead, he launched into a whole monologue about seizing the day, embracing the grind, and turning every challenge into an opportunity. I tried to steer the conversation back to normal topics, asking about hobbies, weekend plans, favorite foods. Every time, he circled back to some motivational aphorism, like he was reciting a LinkedIn post in real life. I was trying to keep my face neutral, sip my coffee, and figure out if he was joking or just permanently like this. But it was clear he wasn't joking. He really spoke entirely in quotes, platitudes, and lessons from life, as if every mundane question was a chance for enlightenment. Ordering was another nightmare. I asked what he wanted, and he said something that sounded like, "One must fuel the body to fuel the mind," and nodded at the menu like I should understand that was his order. I tried to clarify, asking if he meant a latte or just water, and he responded with a story about someone who changed their life by making intentional choices at breakfast. I felt my patience then, but I laughed nervously, thinking maybe this was part of his charm. The meal arrived, and the real horror began. Every bite he took was accompanied by a reflection or a quote. If I tried to say something simple, like commenting on the coffee, he would redirect it into some life lesson about savoring every moment. I remember feeling trapped in this loop, trying to participate in conversation, but constantly derailed by a nonstop stream of motivational nonsense. People at nearby tables started glancing over. Some smiled awkwardly, maybe thinking it was a joke or a podcast recording. But there were no cameras, no phones held up, just a man who refused to speak normally. He didn't just speak in quotes, though. He had a system. I noticed him pulling out his phone every few minutes, scrolling, then reading aloud bits of articles, captions, or posts, as if they were profound insights meant to guide my entire existence. I started keeping track in my head. Every answer, every comment, every reaction was somehow reframed as a lesson, a quote, or a story. There was no small talk, no jokes, no casual sharing. Every question I asked about him personally was met with some generalized statement about life, growth, or ambition. I tried to laugh it off at first. This had to be some kind of prank, right? Maybe he hit a bet with friends. Maybe he thought this was a new dating trend. Maybe he was testing my patience. But the deeper the date went, the more I realized there was no end, no punchline. The cafe seemed smaller and more confining. The music in the background faded, the smell of coffee got stronger, and my mind started spinning as I realized I was trapped with someone whose entire identity seemed to exist only in motivational speak. At one point, I tried to shift topics, asking something about music or movies. He nodded slowly and said, "Every note you hear, every frame you watch can teach you if you're willing to see the lessons." I tried to respond normally, making some comment about a new movie I had seen, and he countered with, "Life is a stage, and every scene you witness is a chance to evolve." "Are you evolving?" I felt a chill run down my spine. I wasn't talking to a person. I was talking to a script. Lunch dragged on. He didn't check his phone for texts. He didn't glance around the cafe except to illustrate a point. His expressions were intense, eyes wide, hands gesturing as if he were giving a TED talk instead of sharing a meal with someone on a first date. The more I listened, the more I started to notice tiny patterns. He had a list of quotes memorized, or maybe even written down somewhere, and he was just cycling through them. Occasionally, he would invent one on the spot, something that sounded vaguely like a fortune cookie or LinkedIn post, and nod at me expectantly, waiting for some reaction. I started playing a mental game with myself, trying to answer each quote with something equally vague, trying to stay engaged while maintaining sanity. It was exhausting. My brain kept screaming for real conversation, for normal human connection, for a break from the constant stream of life lessons that made me feel like I was in some bizarre motivational seminar I hadn't signed up for. By the time the dessert menu came, I realized there was no point in expecting anything normal. He read the dessert options aloud like a list of opportunities, each one a metaphor for life's choices. I tried to steer him towards something casual, like a chocolate cake, but he reframed it as selecting the sweetest moment life offers, embracing it fully and allowing it to nourish the soul. I put my fork down and just watched, wondering if anyone else in the cafe could feel the same creeping horror I did. It wasn't just the quotes. It was the atmosphere he created. Other diners seemed vaguely uncomfortable, but he was oblivious. His presence dominated the small cafe, turning it into a stage for his personal motivational broadcast. I started noticing the small things. How he smiled whenever he delivered a line, how he leaned forward slightly after each one, waiting for a reaction, how he always returned his internal rhythm no matter what I said. It was like being stuck in a loop of enthusiasm that had no real human grounding. Paying the bill was awkward. I half expected him to leave a tip that included some note about gratitude or growth. He didn't, but the date didn't end in relief. Walking out of the cafe, I felt drained, like I had been talking to a human-shaped motivational poster for 2 hours. My hands shook slightly from holding my coffee too long. My stomach twisted with a mix of confusion and disbelief. I kept thinking about what had just happened. He hadn't lied on Hinge, hadn't hidden anything overtly, but the reality of spending time with someone whose personality exists entirely in quotes was more disturbing than any obvious red flag could have been. Even days later, I could remember the rhythm, the cadence, the way he used every single question as a platform to deliver his personal pep talk. I imagined going on another date and seeing him again, the same endless stream of quotes, the same TED Talk gestures. It's funny in hindsight, but at the time, it was genuinely unsettling, like my brain had been hijacked for 2 hours and forced to endure constant LinkedIn-style motivation without a pause button. There's something terrifying about someone being completely themselves, without apology, in a way that's so alien to your own expectations. Derek wasn't aggressive, rude, or threatening. He was just completely committed to being a walking, talking, breathing motivational poster, and I had been trapped in his performance. When I tell the story now, people laugh, but they don't fully get the depth of the weirdness, the way it permeated every second, the subtle panic that grew as I realized there was no end, no normal conversation, just quotes and stories, and life lessons cascading nonstop. I still remember the way the cafe smelled that day, the faint tang of espresso, the warmth of the sun on the brick wall, and the way he leaned forward, eyes intense, ready with the next line. It was exhausting, absurd, and, in its own strange way, unforgettable. I should have known something was off the second I saw the text from her confirming our date. The message was breezy casual, nothing that hinted at the chaos that was about to unfold. I thought I was just meeting someone for coffee, a chilled out vibe, maybe a laugh or two. I had been swiping for weeks, grinding through the usual small talk, so when I finally connected with someone who seemed normal, at least on paper, I thought, why not? The cafe she picked was this tiny, sunlit corner spot, one of those places where the tables wobble slightly, the baristas know everyone by name, and the walls are covered in mismatched art that probably came from local artists or a thrift shop. It was cozy in a way that usually makes people feel safe, not like it was about to be the stage for a horror show. I got there a few minutes early and grabbed the table near the window, the kind where I could see the street outside without being too obvious about it. I ordered a latte while I waited, scrolling through my phone and trying to calm the little twinge of anxiety that always comes with first dates. Then she arrived. She was casual, jeans and a hoodie, hair pulled back, smiling like everything was normal. She waved, slid into the seat across from me, and we exchanged the usual hellos. I thought this was going to be a chill start. It all went fine for the first few minutes. We ordered drinks, talked about our jobs, shared some laughs over minor frustrations at the city. Then, completely out of nowhere, she said it. She casually leaned back, sipping her coffee, and told me that her ex was outside. Not in a paranoid way, not in some dramatic confession, just like she was mentioning the weather. She added that he promised not to come in unless she texted him a code word. At first, I laughed nervously. Maybe she was joking, but her expression was completely straight, completely calm. My brain started flipping through possibilities. Why would she casually mention this on a first date? Was this normal behavior? Was this a test? A weird icebreaker? Nothing I could come up with seemed to make sense, but there she was, completely relaxed while casually mentioning a man who could show up at any moment if a code word was sent. The next half hour was a blur of minor panic disguised as polite conversation. I tried to stay engaged, talking about work, hobbies, travel, but every few sentences my mind kept wandering to the idea that anyone could literally walk in through that door at any second. She didn't act nervous, though. She acted like it was a normal part of her dating life, like this was a minor inconvenience and not a setup for a nightmare. That made it worse. The fact that she was calm made me hyper-aware of my own creeping anxiety. I started noticing other things about the cafe. The bell above the door jingled every time someone came in, and I found myself jumping at each noise, imagining that it could be him. I watched the street through the window like I was some kind of private detective, scanning for movement, trying to imagine if anyone outside could even remotely be related to her story. My coffee went cold because I couldn't focus on drinking it. Every few minutes, she would glance at her phone, and my stomach would drop thinking maybe she was texting the code word, just casually keeping me on edge. She kept the conversation going, oblivious to my growing tension. She asked questions about me, but it was hard to answer because my mind kept looping on the scenario outside. I tried to focus to be polite, to keep the conversation moving like nothing strange had been said, but it was impossible. The idea of a person, an ex, just waiting outside to potentially intervene at a moment's notice made every casual comment she made feel sinister. The calmness in her tone, the normalcy of her posture, it was like she had turned something horrifying into a routine part of life. Halfway through our drinks, she mentioned the code word again, almost as an afterthought, like it was casual small talk. She said it in a way that made it sound like anyone would understand. I kept trying to picture it. Her outside in the cafe, texting a secret word that could allow her ex to come in, while I just sat there. I started noticing details I hadn't before. The cracked corner of the window frame, the way the chairs were arranged, the barista moving around as if nothing unusual was happening. The contrast made it feel even more surreal. By the time we ordered food, I was so tense I couldn't eat much. She was animated, talking about her work, her hobbies, her friends, and I was hyper aware of the possibility that at any moment someone could walk in with the right password. Every laugh she offered felt slightly off, every gesture magnified, as if she were performing a role and I was the only person who realized how bizarre the scenario was. I couldn't figure out if she was dangerous, unstable, or just thought this was a normal part of dating life. The ambiguity was paralyzing. At some point, I noticed a man outside, leaning against the wall, checking his phone. My heart jumped. Was that him? Was that really her ex, just standing there waiting? She casually mentioned something about the weather again, like it was the most ordinary thing, and I felt my pulse spike. I tried to act normal, but my hands were shaking slightly as I sipped my now cold drink. She seemed oblivious to the tension she had created, talking about movies and books and her weekend plans, making it seem like nothing unusual was happening. Then came the subtle escalation. She pulled out her phone, typed something, and put it away. My stomach dropped. I didn't know if she had just sent the code word or if she was pretending. The uncertainty was the worst part. It hung over the table like a cloud, turning a casual first date into a psychological test. I felt like I had no control, no safe space. Trapped in a scenario I had no way to predict or escape gracefully. We finished the meal, and I felt like I was walking on eggshells. She suggested a walk, saying it would be nice to get fresh air. I followed her outside, eyes scanning the street, heart hammering, every pedestrian a potential threat. The ex wasn't there, but I couldn't relax. The idea that he could be anywhere waiting made the world feel hostile, like some alternate reality where normal rules didn't apply. She walked ahead, texting lightly, talking casually, completely unaware of the inner panic I was experiencing. Eventually, the date ended. She hugged me goodbye, still calm, still normal, and walked away down the street. I stayed frozen for a moment, looking around, processing that nothing had actually happened, that no ex had stormed in, that I was still alive. The cafe was quiet, normal, and yet everything felt different. My brain kept replaying the whole encounter, analyzing the details, trying to understand why someone would casually incorporate a real threat into a first date conversation. Walking home, I felt both relieved and haunted. The tension, the possibility of an unseen danger, The casual attitude toward a very real boundary violation, it all stayed with me. I kept imagining scenarios. What if he had come in? What if she had texted the code word without telling me? The date was over, but the anxiety lingered, a constant reminder that what seems casual on the surface can mask something deeply unsettling underneath. Even days later, I could picture her calm posture, her casual smile, the way she spoke about the ex as if he were a minor footnote in a normal life. The fear wasn't dramatic, it wasn't cinematic, but it was real, slow, and creeping like a cloud that you can't shake. It wasn't about the ex exactly. It was about how she normalized a potential threat as part of dating, about how easily someone could turn your first meeting into a psychological minefield. And the worst part was the uncertainty. There was no scream, no confrontation, no dramatic exit. Just the lingering possibility, the knowledge that at any moment, normalcy could be interrupted, that someone could step inside if a secret word was sent. That uncertainty was far more disturbing than any actual action could have been. I had been feeling a mix of excitement and nerves all day. Mostly excitement because I'd finally matched with someone on Hinge who seemed normal. His profile was typical enough, smiling photos, a few jokes, nothing over the top. But there was something about the way he wrote his bio that made me think he was maybe a little too polished, too perfect. I pushed that thought aside, figured everyone tries to put their best foot forward online. The cafe he picked was this low-key, artsy place, tucked behind a strip of shops you'd only notice if you were paying attention. The kind of spot with exposed brick, quirky light fixtures, and a smell that's a mix of freshly ground coffee and whatever pastries they baked that morning. It felt like the kind of place where you could actually have a decent conversation, which is why I agreed to meet him there. I arrived a little early, which I always do because I hate rushing and I like to scope the place out. He was already there, sitting at a table by the window, scrolling on his phone. He looked up, smiled, and waved, and I felt that little spark of hope that maybe this wouldn't be a total disaster. I slid into the seat across from him, we exchanged greetings, and the usual first date small talk began. The first part of the date went fine, even surprisingly smooth. He asked questions, laughed at my jokes, shared a few stories about work and life. I started to relax a little, sipping my latte, thinking maybe my gut reaction was just nerves. The cafe was moderately busy but not loud, which made it feel comfortable. I didn't notice anything strange yet, no red flags, nothing that screamed run. It was just two people getting to know each other over coffee and muffins, the kind of normal interaction you'd expect from a first date. Then I excused myself to go to the bathroom. Nothing unusual, just a quick break, and I figured he'd probably check his phone or maybe glance out the window. What I didn't expect was what I saw when I came back. He wasn't sitting casually scrolling his phone or watching the street. He was standing next to our table, leaning slightly toward the waiter who had just brought our drinks, gesturing with his hands in this oddly serious way. The waiter looked uncomfortable, nodding and giving short answers while my date scribbled something on a napkin. My first thought was that maybe he was asking about the menu, double-checking ingredients, but then I realized he was asking about me. He was literally interviewing the waiter about me, trying to verify my personality, whatever that meant. I froze in the doorway for a moment, my brain struggling to process it. People don't do that. You don't go on a first date and then suddenly interrogate a stranger about the person sitting across from you. The waiter glanced over at me, probably hoping I'd intervene or at least show some kind of acknowledgement, and I felt a mix of embarrassment and creeping fear. I walked back to the table slowly, trying to figure out what to say, what to do, how to process the absurdity of it all. He turned toward me with this big smile like nothing unusual was happening, like asking a waiter if I was the kind of person who sticks to plans or laughs at good jokes was a totally normal first date activity. I couldn't speak, so I just sat down, my hands gripping the edge of the table a little too tightly. The waiter, bless him, gave me this small, apologetic shrug, clearly wishing he could disappear into the back. The rest of the date devolved into this surreal, almost Orwellian scenario. He kept checking in with the waiter every few minutes, sometimes excusing himself to ask another verification question about me, all while acting completely normal when he was facing me. I started noticing things I hadn't before, the way he would glance over my shoulder like he was measuring my reactions, the way his questions to the waiter were just casual. They were structured, methodical, like he was gathering data for some kind of personality report. I tried to keep the conversation going, asked about his hobbies, his weekend plans, trying to ignore the fact that he was running some kind of behind-the-scenes investigation into my character. Every laugh, every gesture, every casual comment I made felt like it was being scrutinized by two sets of eyes, his and the waiter's. I couldn't focus on the small talk anymore. My mind kept looping on the absurdity of it. Who does that? Who thinks that interrogating a stranger about their date in real time is okay? The waiter was polite, but the tension was palpable. I could see him hesitating every time my date approached, trying to come up with answers that wouldn't anger this guy who clearly thought the cafe was part of his personal personality testing lab. I started imagining the conversation, questions about my humor, my patience, my hobbies, my reactions to stress. It was insane. Completely insane. I felt I had stumbled into some kind of experiment I hadn't signed up for. At one point, he pulled out his phone and started taking notes, typing quickly while glancing between me and the waiter. The whole scenario was so absurd that part of me wanted to laugh, but another part of me was frozen in this low-level panic. I could feel my stomach tightening, my pulse picking up. The cozy cafe, the quirky art on the walls, the smell of coffee, it all felt like a stage set for something completely unreal. I tried to redirect his attention, steer the conversation back to something normal, but every attempt was met with a small detour, another question to the waiter, another data point about me being collected. I couldn't escape it. I felt trapped in a situation where my own behavior was under constant evaluation by someone who had decided he had the authority to verify me like some kind of human checklist. By the time the date was halfway over, I couldn't focus on the conversation at all. My thoughts were consumed by the absurdity and creepiness of the situation. I kept picturing other people's reactions if they saw what was happening, imagining the horror on their faces as he interrogated a stranger about the person sitting across from him. The waiter had stopped making eye contact with me entirely, just nodding and answering questions as quickly as possible to appease this bizarre scenario. Eventually, the date wound down. I barely ate, barely drank, my mind spinning with disbelief and a strange, lingering fear. We left the cafe, and I could still see the waiter glancing at us from the doorway, probably relieved that it was finally over. My date walked beside me, still cheerful, still oblivious to the tension he had created, acting like verifying a personality through a waiter was normal first date behavior. Walking home, I couldn't stop replaying everything. The methodical nature of it, the way he treated the cafe like an extension of his personality assessment lab, the calmness with which he interrogated a stranger about me, it all lingered in my mind like a persistent echo. I kept imagining hypothetical situations, like what if he had asked more invasive questions, or what if the waiter had said something that didn't match his perception of me. The scenario felt like it had ripped a hole in reality, leaving me with a lingering sense of unease that didn't go away. Even days later, I would picture the scene, him leaning toward the waiter, scribbling notes, nodding seriously, smiling at me like nothing was off, and I would shiver at the memory. It wasn't a scream or a fight or a confrontation. It was quiet, insidious, like someone had quietly invaded a moment of normalcy and made it into something deeply unsettling. The absurdity of it made it worse. It was one thing to meet someone awkward on a date, another entirely to feel like your personality is being audited by your date in real time through a third party. The memory sticks because it's the kind of horror that doesn't leave a trace but lingers anyway. No physical harm, no dramatic argument, just a subtle, creeping realization that you are not in control, that your behavior is being analyzed in ways that feel invasive and disturbing. I have no idea what he thought he would accomplish. No idea why he thought a first date was the right moment to conduct a character verification. All I know is that normalcy had been shattered, and even now, years later, it's hard not to picture him leaning over the waiter's shoulder, nodding, typing notes, smiling at me like I was part of some experiment I didn't agree to. I had been talking to her on Hinge for a couple of weeks, and honestly, it felt like one of the few conversations that didn't make me want to immediately close the app. She was funny in this weird, dry way, sent memes that somehow made sense to my sense of humor, and didn't overshare the typical first date drama about jobs or exes. We agreed to meet at this tiny vegan cafe that had these huge windows letting in the afternoon sun, kind of a hidden gem in the middle of the city. It smelled faintly of roasted chickpeas and turmeric, and the kind of music that's just quiet enough not to be distracting. I was excited, thinking this could actually be a decent date instead of another awkward scroll through a person's curated online life. I arrived first, found a table near the corner with a decent view of the street, and started people watching while I waited. The place wasn't crowded, just a few students with laptops and a couple of older couples who looked like they were stuck in the past decade's coffee culture. She walked in about 5 minutes later, carrying a tote bag and wearing this oversized scarf that made her look like she just stepped out of some indie Instagram aesthetic. She smiled at me and I waved back, trying not to overthink the fact that first impressions are always a trap. She slid into the seat across from me, and the conversation started casually enough. At first, everything was normal. We talked about the cafe, the weird vegan menu options, some of our favorite movies, and even our jobs, but the conversation stayed light. She mentioned she was into astrology casually, just one line as if it were a tiny detail, and I made a mental note. I've never been big on astrology, but I can nod politely when someone brings it up without judgment. So far, nothing weird, just a hobby. Then, about halfway through our first main course, she leaned in a little and casually asked me my moon sign. I figured it was harmless curiosity, so I told her. That's when the atmosphere started to shift in this subtle, almost imperceptible way. Her eyes narrowed slightly, and she pulled out her phone and started typing furiously. I assumed she was looking up something fun, maybe double-checking a star chart, and I didn't pay much attention at first. A few minutes later, she sat back, looked at me, and said that my moon sign was incompatible with her cat's birth chart. That's right, she had literally just compared my astrological profile with her cat's and decided it was a deal breaker. I blinked a few times, trying to make sense of what I'd just heard. My brain kept looping around the words, her cat's birth chart, my moon sign, incompatible, deal breaker. None of it made sense. Not in a casual dating context, not in any logical scenario I've ever imagined for a first date. She didn't ask questions, didn't make a joke about it, didn't laugh awkwardly and then move on. She simply decided that our cosmic incompatibility meant the date was over. She started packing up her things, tucking her tote bag and scarf together like she was preparing for some kind of ritual exit. I sat there, halfway through my food, just trying to figure out if this was real life or some bizarre fever dream. The cafe felt suddenly quieter, the soft music more like background static than anything comforting. I tried to protest or at least joke my way through it, but she wasn't having it. She insisted that she couldn't continue the date because the universe hadn't spoken through her cat, and any attempt to proceed would go against the natural order of the stars. I watched her calmly place her utensils on the plate, straighten the napkin, and stand up. It was like she had rehearsed this in advance, like there was a mental checklist. Check moon sign, verify cat compatibility, end date if cosmic misalignment detected. The staff in the cafe started noticing the tension, and I could feel some curious glances, people wondering why this woman was abandoning a perfectly nice guy over astrology and a cat. I tried to explain, my voice awkward, stumbling over words, but she just shook her head slightly and said it wasn't meant to be, the universe knew better. It was surreal. I felt like I was trapped in some kind of absurdist sketch, the kind where reality pretends to make sense until it doesn't. As she walked out, the sunlight hitting her scarf made it look almost ethereal, like she was floating away on some cosmic wind. I sat there in disbelief, trying to process everything. The food I had ordered suddenly tasted like cardboard, the cafe lights too bright, the hum of conversation too loud. My brain kept replaying the scenario over and over. She had literally ended the date because my astrological alignment clashed with her cat's. It wasn't even a joke. Not a tease. Not a weird icebreaker. Just a full-on cosmic veto. I called one of my friends later, barely able to form the words without laughing and crying at the same time. I told them what happened, emphasizing the cat, the moon sign, the unwavering certainty she had that the universe itself was the arbiter of our potential relationship. They laughed, but there was this underlying tension in my voice because it didn't feel funny when it happened. It felt like a slow, creeping intrusion into normalcy, where someone's logic and values could shift so radically in a matter of minutes that reality itself seemed unstable. The next few days, I kept imagining her explaining this to friends, telling them the story with complete seriousness, like she had been the victim of cosmic injustice rather than the instigator of it. I kept replaying the moment she checked her phone, the way her eyes lit up when she confirmed the incompatibility, the calm and decisive way she announced the end of the date. It was disturbing not in a violent or aggressive way, but in a quiet, unnerving way. It was like being confronted with a logic that doesn't make sense but is enforced with absolute certainty. Even when I told myself to move on, the memory lingered. I imagined other scenarios where people could end things based on increasingly arbitrary rules, where the alignment of celestial bodies dictated the course of human relationships. Every time I think of astrology now, there's this subtle flashback to that cafe, that moment when someone's personal sense of cosmic authority made me feel small and confused in a public space. The date had been in a sunlit, cozy little cafe, but the memory of it feels like a different world entirely, one governed not by social norms or basic human decency, but by charts, signs, and the unyielding authority of her cat's astrological fate. The absurdity is what makes it stick, that someone could end up perfectly fine meeting over something that, in any other context, would seem utterly trivial, almost laughable. But the way she did it, with such calm, such conviction, makes it linger. The universe had declared me incompatible, and all I could do was sit there, stunned, trying to reconcile the mundane reality of my day with the bizarre cosmic logic of hers. I left the cafe that day feeling a mix of confusion, disbelief, and a weird, lingering dread. The street outside was normal, people walking dogs, cars rolling by, sunlight bouncing off windows. But in my mind, a small corner of reality had tilted, warped by the idea that my fate had been assessed and vetoed by the alignment of planets and the mood of a cat I'd never met. I couldn't stop picturing her walking away, tote bag in hand, scarf floating slightly, satisfied that she had upheld the laws of the universe by refusing to continue the date. It's one of those stories that doesn't feel like it ends. I still think about it sometimes. Imagine alternative timelines where the stars aligned differently, where the cat approved, where we got dessert and laughed about the absurdity of it all. But the real timeline is the one where I sat alone in a cafe, staring at a half-eaten salad, contemplating how a first date could become a cosmic trial with a verdict dictated by a cat's birth chart. The strangeness of it, the quiet intrusion of someone else's logic into your life, is what makes it stick, what makes it linger in a way that nothing else on a first date ever has. I wasn't expecting much when I matched with him on Hinge. Honestly, I was in that half-bored, half-curious phase of dating where I mostly swiped for distraction between work emails and scrolling through whatever nonsense was trending. His profile was straightforward. Photo of him in a hoodie at some park. Caption about loving coffee and weekend hikes. Nothing outrageous, nothing alarming. We messaged back and forth a bit, enough to convince me it was worth meeting, and then decided on this little neighborhood cafe that had a weird mix of industrial furniture and overly bright hanging lights. I thought it would be casual, easy, no pressure. I got there first, as usual, because I like to scope out the place, see how busy it is, pick a spot that feels good. The cafe was kind of loud, but in a comforting way. The clatter of dishes, soft indie music in the background, people talking but not screaming. I found a table tucked against the window and sat down, ordering a tea while scrolling aimlessly on my phone. He arrived about 5 minutes later, looked around like he was scanning for something specific, and spotted me and waved. I waved back, smiled, and that was when I noticed it. Under his arm, he was carrying a full-size clipboard. I assumed it was a notebook for work or a sketch pad or something. Weird, sure, but nothing alarming. He slid into the chair across from me and immediately placed the clipboard on the table. He didn't open it or mention it. We started talking, casually at first, about mundane things. The cafe, our jobs, what we like to do on weekends. But as soon as I asked him a question about his work, he snapped the clipboard open, pulled out a pen, and started scribbling furiously. I thought maybe he liked taking notes. It's not typical, but whatever, maybe he was the kind of person who processed conversation visually. But then it continued. Everything I said, every small detail, every joke, even the things I thought were offhand, he wrote down. Not occasionally, not like a doodle, but with intense focus, pen moving constantly, eyes flicking between me and the page. I tried to ignore it at first, thinking maybe he was working on a personal project, but as the appetizers arrived, I realized it wasn't stopping. He wasn't eating yet. He was too busy writing. I picked at my salad, trying to carry on the conversation, but every time I glanced up, he was bent over that clipboard, completely absorbed, like a scientist observing a specimen under a microscope. I remember asking him casually about hobbies and interests, expecting a normal discussion. He gave answers, but then immediately wrote something down in block letters that looked like it could be a rating system or a checklist. I squinted to see if it was notes about his own thoughts, but it was clearly observations about me. The way I smiled, the way I gestured with my hands, even the tone of my laughter, he wrote it all down. At some point, it got stranger. He began asking what I thought were normal flirty questions, but then as soon as I answered, he'd pause, scribble, nod slowly, and repeat the process. There was no real conversation. Every exchange felt like a transaction of information being logged into his little database. I kept trying to inject humor, thinking maybe he was nervous or had some quirky dating ritual, but nothing landed. I started to feel like I was being tested, examined, evaluated in a way that was far too precise for a first date. The middle of the meal was surreal. The waiter came and refilled our drinks. I tried to talk about childhood memories, vacations, favorite movies, normal human stuff, but he didn't really respond. He just scribbled, occasionally glancing up with this faint, tight-lipped smile that didn't reach his eyes. By this point, other patrons were starting to notice too. There's something unsettling about someone sitting across a table and writing notes the entire time you talk, completely focused on logging another person like they were part of the study. I felt exposed, stripped down to a collection of behaviors and quirks he was categorizing on paper. I remember the moment clearly when the entree arrived. He set his fork down, glanced at the food, then immediately returned to the clipboard. I began eating, but every bite felt awkward, like I was performing for some audience of one. I even caught myself laughing at things that weren't funny, just to see if he'd note the response differently. It was impossible to shake this feeling that the date wasn't about connection, it was about data collection. Eventually, the meal ended, the plates cleared, and he finally looked up from the clipboard. He closed it with a snap, leaned back slightly, and gave me this small, formal nod. Then he said the words that cemented it in my brain forever. "Great interview, will be in touch." I froze for a second, trying to process what had just happened. Interview? That's not a word people use on first dates. That's something you say to a candidate for a job, a formal evaluation, not a person you met online who seemed halfway normal until an hour ago. My stomach dropped, my tea went cold, and I felt a creepy and crawling sense of violation that's hard to explain. I had spent the entire date performing, sharing details of myself, only to find out that in his mind I was a subject being screened. Not a person. A case study. An interviewee. He didn't linger to chat after that. He stood, collected his clipboard, and left like he'd completed a task, leaving me there at the table staring at the empty seat, feeling like I had been in some parallel dimension where dating and job applications were indistinguishable. I didn't even know how to react. I sat there for a long time, just staring at the table, trying to make sense of the meal, the conversation, the constant pen scratching, the strange intensity of his observation. Everything I had said, every laugh, every gesture, every story, logged somewhere on that clipboard, assessed and stored for some future evaluation that I would never have any control over. Walking home, I kept replaying the date in my mind. I imagined the notes he had made organized into categories, tallied, rated, scored. Did he have a rubric? Did he assign me a number for eye contact, for enthusiasm, for wit? Did he compare me against a mental checklist of ideal first date traits? The thought was both absurd and terrifying, and it followed me like a shadow for the rest of the day. Even simple things like the way someone smiles with gestures started to feel like I was performing for an invisible audience, just in case someone was noting it down somewhere. That night, I texted a friend, just a long, rambling message about what happened. They laughed at first, thinking I was exaggerating, until I explained the clipboard, the pen scribbling, and the final line, "Great interview, will be in touch." Their laughter faded, replaced with the same weird, creeping tension I had felt that day. It wasn't a funny story, not really. It was disturbing because it was plausible. Anyone could do that. Anyone could sit across from you with a clipboard, logging every little detail, and treat human interaction like a survey. Even now, I think about it sometimes. The date was mundane in terms of the setting, just a cafe, ordinary food, ordinary weather, but the experience was a kind of horror. A slow, creeping realization that someone you met for a casual drink could turn the simplest, most mundane conversation into a structured, evaluated, formal interview. It's not aggressive, it's not violent, but it's invasive in a way that sticks. It changes how you perceive interactions, makes you question whether people are seeing you as a person or just a database to be rated. I haven't seen him since, obviously. No call, no message, nothing. I imagine somewhere in his apartment there's that clipboard, filled with scribbles, observations, notes about my body language, my speech patterns, my responses, and maybe dozens of others like me. It's such a simple thing, but the thought of it keeps me a little on edge around strangers. How many people are silently taking notes during conversation, documenting behaviors, logging responses, treating first dates as an experiment rather than a connection? That's the part that sticks. Not the clipboard itself, not even the formal tone. It's the invasion of normal human interaction, the reduction of a person to a series of observations, and the way it makes you feel like your privacy can be invaded without ever realizing it in the moment. By the time I finished walking poem, it wasn't just a bad date. It was a lesson in discomfort and exercise in how quickly the ordinary can turn quietly disturbing. It's easy to laugh at the story now, to tell friends about the clipboard guy and their exaggerated facial expressions, but the memory lingers. That clipboard, those notes, the careful scrutiny of my gestures, all of it feels like a small invasive shadow that follows me whenever I meet someone new. There's been dramatic finale. No shocking revelation beyond the fact that someone treated me like an interviewee. Just a slow, methodical, clinical observation disguised as casual conversation. That's the kind of first day of horror that lingers long after the tea goes cold and the cafe lights dim. I wasn't expecting much from this date, honestly. It started like every other Hinge meetup I'd done lately, messy mix of curiosity and low-level dread, just hoping the other person wasn't going to be completely insane. Her profile was simple, a photo of her with a big grin holding a pizza slice, a caption about loving surprises and being spontaneous. That sounded fun enough, right? I was in a let's see what happens mood, so I agreed to meet at a small Italian place tucked behind a bookstore. The kind of place where you step in and smell garlic, tomato sauce, and bread baking in the oven, all at the same time, and it makes your stomach tighten in that good way before you even sit down. I got there first and snagged a table in the corner, hoping the quiet spot would make things feel casual. I ordered a glass of iced tea while scanning the menu and glancing at the people walking by outside. She arrived a few minutes later, kind of bouncing on her heels like she was excited for a theme park ride instead of a dinner date. I waved, she waved back, and sat down across from me, practically vibrating with energy. At first, she was charming and friendly, asking questions about my work, joking about the small portions at fancy places, laughing easily. I let myself relax, the kind of relax where you think, maybe this isn't going to be weird. We ordered food, and everything seemed normal. I had spaghetti, she had a salad, and we talked about music, movies, random weekend plans. But there was this undercurrent I couldn't ignore, a sort of forced eagerness, like she was testing me constantly. She leaned in every time I said something, eyes wide, nodding as if I was supposed to say the perfect answer. It was subtle at first, but after the third joke that went a little flat, I realized she was waiting for something more than conversation, like she needed a reaction, a validation, a sign that I was on board with her energy. Halfway through the meal, she brought up surprises. Not casually, not in the I like a good surprise party way, but in a way that made me uncomfortable, like it was a warning. She described how she loved planning things in advance, secretly organizing little moments, making her friends do things she decided for them. I nodded, tried to laugh, and thought maybe she was just quirky, a little overzealous. I didn't realize how literal that would turn out to be. By the time dessert arrived, I felt like I was on a roller coaster where I hadn't signed the waiver. She was still cheerful, still smiling, still radiating this manic energy that made me feel both thrilled and cornered at the same time. The waiter set down the tiramisu, and I was trying to dig in, hoping for a quiet few minutes of sweet distraction. She was staring at me, smirking, like she'd been holding back a secret the entire meal. Then she leaned in and said the words that broke everything. Great news. I already signed us up for a couple's tattoo tomorrow morning. I stopped mid-bite, teetering between laughing and panic. A couple's tattoo. Tomorrow morning. Signed us up. My brain tried to process it. She had just assumed this meal was enough to authorize permanent ink on my body. I looked at her, hoping for a smirk or a wink that suggested she was joking, but her face was serious, eyes shining with excitement. She was so thrilled that I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. She had taken control completely without asking me, all under the guise of her love for surprises. I couldn't move my fork. My mouth went dry. I tried to imagine what kind of tattoo she had chosen, where it would go, whether she had my consent written somewhere invisible on the internet. The thought of waking up tomorrow with matching ink etched onto my skin by someone I'd known for an hour and a half was terrifying. Every detail of that moment is still vivid. The way the candlelight flickered on her face, the faint smell of the tiramisu mixing with her perfume, the way her hand rested casually on the table as if she had just dropped this bomb casually like it was nothing. I tried to protest, in my head at least. There was no way to stop it without making a scene. I imagined her smiling, nodding, ignoring my hesitation entirely because that was her style. She didn't wait for permission. She orchestrated the surprise and expected me to participate, willingly or not. My mind raced through possible exits. I could say no, I could storm out, I could get up and leave everything behind. But each scenario felt heavy, like it would confirm some weird narrative she had written for this date. The rest of the evening was a blur. I mechanically finished my dessert, pushed the plate around, and tried to make small talk, hoping to reclaim a fraction of normalcy. But she kept referencing the tattoo, laughing about designs, joking about how she already picked colors and placement. I felt trapped in a nightmare of spontaneity, the kind where your boundaries are invisible to the person causing the chaos. Everything about the cafe, the people around us, the music, the chatter, faded into the background, leaving only her and the looming tattoo appointment. Walking out of the restaurant, I felt the weight of it all. She skipped ahead like a child excited for Christmas morning, chatting about tattoo parlors, asking which style I preferred, assuming I would go along with it. I trailed behind, trying to think logically, trying to figure out how to navigate this without being rude or aggressive, without turning a dinner date into a confrontation about bodily autonomy. Every scenario seemed like it ended poorly for me, and the energy she radiated made it impossible to feel calm. I realized she had been scripting this entire experience from the moment we matched, manipulating small details, observing reactions, and now she had landed the punchline: permanent commitment in ink. That night, I lay awake replaying the dinner in detail. The way she laughed at things that weren't jokes, the way she described surprises as if they were moral obligations, the way she held herself like she had won some imaginary game. I couldn't shake the image of her hovering over the calendar, pen in hand, checking boxes, marking us down for a morning tattoo session that I never agreed to. It felt invasive in a way I hadn't experienced before. Not violent or threatening, just a kind of controlling enthusiasm that makes you feel powerless. I didn't go to the tattoo appointment, obviously. I spent the next day explaining the situation to friends, watching them alternate between laughter and disbelief. It sounded insane, but every detail was real. I thought about reporting it to the parlor she booked, but the casual way she described signing us up made it seem like it was already a done deal, an invisible agreement in her mind. I realized that for her, consent was just another obstacle to overcome, a detail to ignore in the pursuit of the perfect surprise. Even now, weeks later, I still think about that date in fragments. The smell of garlic and candles in that little Italian place, the way she leaned forward when dropping the tattoo bomb, the sensation of my stomach twisting as I tried to smile and act like everything was normal. It's not a dramatic horror, not a scream-in-the-dark horror. It's subtle, slow, creeping. The kind that makes you rethink what a first date can actually entail, how someone can assert control without force, how someone can frame coercion as excitement and spontaneity. Looking back, the scariest part wasn't the tattoo. It was the realization that someone could take so much for granted in your life, act on your behalf, and be completely oblivious to the terror it might inspire. The idea that a single date could transform into an appointment for permanent markings, scheduled entirely by one person's idea of fun, left a residue of unease. A slow, almost clinical kind of horror, lodged in the memory of a simple evening meal. I can still feel the weight of that clipboard she metaphorically held over me, the way the concept of surprise can mask invasion, and the chilling clarity that sometimes the people you meet on dating apps are not just impulsive. They are meticulously, disturbingly impulsive in ways that make you feel entirely out of control.